Picture this. You are standing alone in the ruins of a temple that has not seen a full congregation in thousands of years. The air is cool and still, heavy with the dust of ages, and the only sound is the soft scuff of your own shoes against the stone underfoot. But you are not walking on mere rock. You are walking on a story. Every groove, every symbol, every deliberate scratch in that floor was placed there with profound intention. These are not random decorations. They are a language, a silent, stone-carved language that was meant to be read not with the eyes, but with the soul. It is a map, a coded testament to one of humanity's most powerful and enduring ideas, that a king is not just a man, but a god walking among us. This is the mystery we are about to unravel together. Across the globe, from the sun-baked plains of Mesopotamia to the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, ancient rulers embarked on an audacious project. They sought to cement their authority not just through conquest or law, but by weaving their very identity into the fabric of the cosmos itself. They built temples that were not just houses of worship, but active declarations of power. And the most compelling evidence of this great endeavor is often right beneath our feet, etched into the very floors those ancient priests and kings walked upon. These unearthed codes are a stunningly direct line into the minds of our ancestors, revealing how they used myth and architecture to construct a reality where the divine and the political were inseparable. In this video, we are going on a grand expedition. We will be time travelers and code breakers, journeying through the majestic halls of Egyptian mortuary temples, the labyrinthine palaces of Minoan Crete, and the towering ziggurates of Babylon. We will see how a simple geometric pattern on a floor could chart the course of the stars, how the image of a slain monster could legitimize an entire dynasty, and how a ceremonial pathway could reenact the journey of a god. This is more than an archaeological tour. It is an exploration of the human heart. It is about our deep, timeless need to find order in chaos, meaning in power, and a connection to something greater than ourselves. By the end of our journey, you will never look at an ancient stone, a modern leader, or even your own place in the world in quite the same way again. To understand the profound messages left in those temple floors, we must first travel back to the very beginning of this idea, to a time when the concept of a king was being invented. This was not a sudden event, but a slow cultural evolution that took root in the fertile river valleys of the ancient world. In places like Mesopotamia, along the Tigris and Euphrates, in Egypt along the life-giving Nile, and millennia later in the jungles of Mesoamerica, humanity was undergoing a radical shift. We were moving from small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers to vast, settled agricultural societies, and with this new way of life came new problems. How do you manage the surplus of grain? How do you organize the irrigation of crops? How do you resolve disputes between thousands of people who are no longer related by blood? The solution was centralized authority, but why would anyone willingly give up their autonomy and their surplus to obey another person? The answer, it seems, was found not on earth but in the heavens. Early rulers, or perhaps the shrewd priests who advised them, made a brilliant and enduring connection. They linked their authority to the ultimate source of power and order their people could conceive of, the gods themselves. This was far more than simple political propaganda. As the renowned historian Henry Frankfurt argued, divine kingship became the very cornerstone of ancient statecraft. It was a social contract written in the stars, a system that provided a terrified population with stability and meaning in a world full of chaos, floods, droughts, and diseases that seemed completely random and cruel. If the king was not just a man but the earthly vessel of a god, then his commands were not mere opinions, they were divine decrees. His success in war was the god's favor. A bountiful harvest was proof of his sacred connection. Even a natural disaster could be explained not as a failure of the king, but as a result of the people's failure to properly honor him. This belief system created a powerful, self-reinforcing loop of legitimacy. We can see this gradual fusion of religious and secular authority etched into some of the oldest artifacts ever discovered. In ancient Sumer, one of the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia, we find the stele of the vultures dating back to around 2500 BCE. It doesn't just show King Enatum leading his army to victory. It vividly depicts the god Ningersu holding the enemy army in a giant net, explicitly demonstrating that the king's military might is an extension of divine will. Similarly, in pre-dynastic Egypt, artifacts like the Narmer palette show the king not only as a triumphant warrior, but already adorned with the symbols of the gods Horus and Hathor. He is portrayed as a superhuman figure, towering over his enemies, performing acts that no ordinary mortal could. This was the careful construction of an ideology, brick by symbolic brick. It answered the deepest existential questions of the age. Why are we here to serve the God King? What is the meaning of a drought? The God King is displeased and must be appeased. This system brought order to the universe by placing a single, divinely anchored point of control at the center of all human and natural affairs. It was the ultimate source of political stability, and it is from this powerful, world-shaping belief that everything else, the grand temples, the sacred rituals, and the coded floors we are about to explore, would inevitably grow. So if the king was the bridge between heaven and earth, his palace and his temple had to be the anchor point for that bridge. These structures were far more than just impressive buildings meant to display wealth and power. They were nothing less than the universe in miniature. The ancient world did not draw a firm line between the spiritual and the physical. The entire cosmos was a living, breathing entity, and the most sacred duty of a ruler was to maintain its delicate balance. To do this, he needed a control center, a place where the order of the heavens could be mirrored on earth, and the temple was that precise instrument. It was a cosmic blueprint engineered to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. Think of it like this: for ancient people, the world could often feel terrifyingly chaotic. Storms, eclipses, and famines were incomprehensible and frightening events. The temple was the ultimate antidote to that fear. It was a bubble of perfect, divine order imposed upon the messy reality of everyday life. Every single aspect of its design was a deliberate choice, a symbolic act. The renowned historian of religion Mircea Eliade called these spaces sacred space, which he contrasted with the profane, disorganized world outside. A temple wasn't just built on a plot of land. It was founded at the very axis of the universe, the point where the divine realm punctured through into our own. Its walls didn't just keep people out, they held chaos at bay. Its roof wasn't just shelter, it was the vault of heaven, and the floor was the firmament. It was the stable ground of creation upon which the drama of the cosmos was ritually played out. We can see this philosophy made stunningly literal in the great ziggurats of Mesopotamia, like the famous Etemenanki in Babylon, which likely inspired the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. These were not just tall buildings for bragging rights. They were stairways to heaven, massive, man-made mountains designed to get the priest-king physically closer to the realm of the gods. Their very names reveal their purpose. Etemenanki translates to the temple foundation of heaven and earth. It was a physical connection point between the two realms. The sides were oriented to the cardinal directions, aligning the structure with the fundamental geometry of the cosmos. The number of levels often held astrological significance, representing the known planets or layers of existence. To walk its ramps was to undertake a spiritual ascent. Similarly, in Egypt, the pyramid was not merely a giant tomb. It was a resurrection machine and a cosmic beacon. The smooth, white limestone casing stones, now almost entirely gone, would have reflected the brutal desert sun, making the structure appear like a solidified beam of light shooting up from the earth. The Egyptians saw it as a solidified version of the primordial mound, the first land that emerged from the infinite waters of chaos at the moment of creation. By being buried within it, the pharaoh was placed at the very origin point of order itself, ensuring his rebirth and the continued stability of the kingdom. The alignment of the Giza pyramids with the stars of Orion's belt is perhaps the most famous example of this celestial mirroring, tethering the king's eternal destiny to the unchangeable night sky. But this symbolic encoding wasn't reserved for the grand exteriors. It permeated every inch of these structures, and the floors were perhaps the most intimate and interactive canvas of all. You didn't just look at the walls and ceiling, you walked upon the story. In Egyptian temples like Karnak, the floor often slopes gradually upward as you move toward the inner sanctum, the darkest, most sacred room where the statue of the god resided. This wasn't a construction error, this was a deliberate architectural feature. The rising floor forced your body into a physical posture of ascent, mimicking the rise of the primordial mound. You were literally walking up out of chaos and into order, out of the human world and into the divine. The floor guided your feet on a symbolic journey. In many traditions, the floor was a map. Intricate mosaics in Roman temples sometimes depicted the known world, with the city of Rome at its center, making a powerful political statement that the empire was synonymous with the civilized universe. In Hindu temple architecture, the entire structure is designed as a symbolic manifestation of the cosmic man, Purusha, and the floor plan, known as the Vastu Purusha Mandala, is a complex geometric grid that charts energy lines and cosmological principles. To step into the temple was to step inside a divine body and a cosmic diagram simultaneously. The floor wasn't a passive surface you stood on. It was an active field that organized space, directed movement, and infused every ritual with deeper meaning. It was the grounded, physical expression of a heavenly ideal, and to walk its path was to participate in the maintenance of the cosmos itself. Now that we understand the temple as a cosmic model, we can truly appreciate the language written across its floors. This was not a language of words, but of symbols, a complex, multi-layered code where every image, every line, and every pattern was dense with meaning. To the uninitiated, it might have looked like beautiful decoration, but to the priests and the ruling elite, it was a sacred text etched in stone, a direct channel to the divine order that legitimized their power. These symbols fell into several powerful categories, each serving a distinct purpose in the narrative of divine kingship. Geometric patterns were perhaps the most fundamental. A simple spiral carved into a stone slab might seem like basic artistry, but in the symbolic language of the ancient world, it was a profound representation of the cosmos. The spiral could depict the journey of the sun, the cycles of the seasons, the path of reincarnation, or the labyrinthine journey to the underworld and back. In many cultures, the circle represented perfection, eternity, and the divine realm, while the square symbolized the earth, the material world, and the ordered kingdom. By inlaying a circle within a square on the floor of a temple, architects were making a powerful statement. The king's rule was the perfect, eternal divine order made manifest on the earthly plane. Mandalas in Hindu and Buddhist temples are the ultimate expression of this, acting as intricate geometric diagrams of the universe used to focus meditation and ritual, guiding the practitioner, and by extension, the king who patronized the temple toward enlightenment and unity with the cosmic principle. Animal motifs provided a more visceral, narrative-driven layer of coding. These were not just representations of local wildlife, they were avatars of divine attributes and mythological stories. In ancient Mesopotamia, the lion was a ubiquitous symbol of raw, untamable power. To walk upon a floor adorned with lions was to walk in the domain of a king who commanded such ferocious strength. In Egypt, the scarab beetle, pushing its ball of dung, was a potent symbol of the sun god Khepri, who rolled the sun across the sky. Its image on a temple floor connected the pharaoh's daily rituals to the sun's eternal, regenerative journey. Perhaps one of the most evocative examples is the labyrinth. The famous labyrinth design on the floor of the Minoan Palace at Knossos is more than a maze. It is a symbolic recreation of the myth of the Minotaur. Walking its confusing path was a ritual reenactment of the heroic journey into the unknown to confront chaos represented by the beast, and emerge victorious, a narrative that directly mirrored the king's role as the hero who protects his people from disorder. Then there were the astrological signs which turned the temple floor into a map of the heavens. In Mayan temples, like those at Copan or Palenque, intricate calendrical inscriptions and star charts were carved directly into the steps and floors. These were not for telling time in a mundane sense. They were for tracking the sacred cycles that governed the universe. A king's coronation had to be timed with a specific planetary alignment, and his every action was judged against the celestial calendar. The floor became a colossal astronomical instrument, aligning the ruler's life with the predictable, majestic motion of the cosmos. This created an unshakable argument for his legitimacy. If the stars themselves dictated his rule, who was mere mortal to question it? This visual language was fiercely guarded knowledge, a form of information control that is startlingly modern in its sophistication. The vast majority of the population, the farmers and laborers, would have seen these symbols with a sense of awe and mystery, understanding their general sacredness but not their specific meanings. This created a hierarchy of knowledge where only the elite, the king and his priestly advisors, could fully read the story of power written beneath their feet. It was the ultimate insider language, ensuring that the narrative of divine right remained unchallenged because it was, quite literally, incomprehensible to the average person. This makes us wonder about the symbols that surround us today. Corporate logos, national flags, the architecture of our government buildings, they all tell a story and project power. Are we, like the ancient citizens walking these temple floors, aware of the full depth of the messages being communicated to us? Or are we also content to simply appreciate the surface beauty, leaving the true decoding to a powerful few? But these magnificent floors, embedded with their cosmic maps and power symbols, were never meant to be merely observed from a distance. They were designed to be activated. The true power of this encoded language was unlocked through movement, through the deliberate and sacred choreography of ritual and ceremony. The temple floor was a stage, and the most important performances enacted upon it were the very dramas that sustained the universe and legitimized the king. Think of these rituals not as simple plays, but as profound technologies of belief. The great anthropologist Victor Turner described rituals as social dramas that have the power to create communitas, a powerful sense of shared identity and solidarity among participants. In these sacred spaces, the encoded floor provided the script and the stage directions for these transformative events, turning abstract myth into tangible, lived experience for everyone present. Imagine the scene in the Grand Temple of Karnak during the Opet festival in ancient Egypt. The air is thick with the smell of incense and the resonant chant of priests. The colossal statue of the god Ammon is carefully placed upon a ceremonial bark, a golden boat, and a procession begins, but this is no random parade. The priests carrying this immense weight follow a very specific, sacred pathway etched into the temple floor. They move from the dark, enclosed sanctuary out into the sun-drenched courtyard, their journey mirroring the sun god Ra's daily voyage across the sky. The pharaoh himself would lead this procession, his bare feet touching specific cartouches and ankh symbols carved into the stone. With every step on this divine roadmap, he wasn't just walking, he was recharging his own divinity, physically absorbing power from the symbols beneath him and demonstrating his role as the living engine of this cosmic cycle. The entire ceremony was a public spectacle that blurred the line between man and God, and the floor was the essential interface that made this transformation possible. This concept of a guided, symbolic path is seen beautifully in the Hindu tradition of pradakshina. In temples across India, you will find breathtakingly intricate mandalas and yantras drawn or inlaid into the floor of the inner sanctum. These are not just art to be admired, they are geometric concentrations of divine energy, blueprints of the universe. A worshipper does not simply stand and pray before the statue of the deity. They walk a clockwise circular path around the central icon, their footsteps tracing the complex patterns of the mandala on the floor. This circumambulation is a form of meditation in motion, a way of aligning one's own energy with the cosmic order represented by the diagram. It is a ritual of centering oneself within the grand scheme of things. For a king being crowned in such a space, this act would have been exponentially more powerful, a literal enactment of taking his rightful place at the very center of the cosmos he was now sworn to protect and govern. The floor could also serve as a potent trigger for communal memory. In the Minoan palace of Nossos, the famous labyrinth design likely served as the focal point for rituals that involved dancing or complex processional movements. Scholars suggest that young initiates might have performed a dance that traced the path of the labyrinth, a physical reenactment of the Theseus myth where the hero navigates the maze to slay the Minotaur. By performing this dance on the very symbol of the story, the participants weren't just hearing a tale from the past, they were becoming the heroes of that tale. They were internalizing the values of courage and cunning, and most importantly, reinforcing the narrative that their king, the descendant of the hero, was their rightful protector from chaos. The ritual, guided by the floor, turned myth into muscle memory, weaving the ideology of divine kingship directly into the physical and cultural body of the society. It was through these shared, emotionally charged performances, staged upon a sacred and coded landscape, that abstract symbols of power were transformed into unshakable social truth. So we have these incredible, coded floors and the powerful rituals that brought them to life. But how do we, thousands of years removed, possibly hope to understand their true meaning? How do we crack a code where the original cipher has been lost to time? The answer lies not in a single field of study, but in a beautiful, sometimes contentious, marriage between two, archaeology and mythology. One discipline provides the cold, hard facts, the physical evidence. The other provides the soul, the narrative context. Without both, the story is incomplete. It's like finding a single, beautiful page from a novel. You can analyze the paper and the ink, but without knowing the chapters that came before, you can never truly grasp the significance of the words. Archaeology gives us the what. It is the science of discovery. Through meticulous excavation, archaeologists unearth these temple floors, often shattered by time, buried under layers of earth and later construction. A key method they use is stratigraphy, the study of these layers of occupation. Think of it like a layered cake where the oldest layer is at the bottom and the newest is on top. By carefully analyzing the stratum in which a piece of carved flooring is found, archaeologists can determine its relative age, linking it to a specific period of a king's reign or a particular dynasty. Then there's iconography, the detailed study and interpretation of symbols. An iconographer will meticulously catalogue every spiral, every animal figure, every astrological sign on a floor. They compare these symbols to others found on pottery, seals, and wall paintings from the same era and region, slowly building a visual dictionary. They might note that a specific type of crown appears alongside a particular god, suggesting that symbol represents royal divinity. Or they might track the evolution of a serpent motif across centuries, seeing how its meaning shifts from a symbol of chaos to one of protection. The work of archaeologists like Dame Kathleen Kenyon, whose rigorous digging techniques in the mid-20th century revolutionized our understanding of ancient Jericho and its ritual spaces, provides the essential factual foundation. She didn't just dig for treasure, she dug for context, carefully recording the position of every artifact to reconstruct ancient life with scientific precision. But data alone is silent. A catalogue of symbols is just a list without a story. This is where mythology breathes life into the stones. Mythology provides the why. Those geometric patterns and animal figures are not random. They are illustrations of the foundational stories, the sacred narratives that gave a society its identity and its king his legitimacy. The myth of the sun god's journey across the sky explains why an Egyptian temple floor slopes upward toward the sanctuary. The epic of Gilgamesh and his quest for immortality gives profound meaning to a specific sequence of symbols on an Assyrian palace floor, transforming them from decoration into a chapter of a heroic saga. Comparative mythology, the study of these stories across different cultures, is utterly invaluable here. When we see a hero slaying a serpentine monster in Mesopotamian myths, in the stories of the Hittites, and in the legends of ancient Greece, we start to recognize a universal archetype, the battle of order against chaos. This is where the work of a thinker like Joseph Campbell becomes so essential. He argued that myths are public dreams, drawn from the deepest wellsprings of the human psyche. They follow patterns like the hero's journey that resonate across continents and millennia. By applying this lens, a researcher can look at a mysterious scene on a Mayan ball court floor and hypothesize that it depicts not just a game, but a local version of this universal story of death and rebirth, thereby legitimizing the ruler who sponsored the game as the hero of the tale. This collaborative dance between the two fields is not without its challenges, its moments of tension and reinterpretation. The evidence is often frustratingly fragmentary. We might have a stunningly preserved section of floor from a Minoan palace, but it's surrounded by broken rubble, leaving the full mural impossible to reconstruct. Or we might have a complete mythological text from a later period, but can we safely use it to interpret symbols from a temple that is 1,000 years older? Historians' own biases can also cloud interpretation. Early archaeologists, products of their colonial era, often misinterpreted symbols in other cultures through a Eurocentric lens, seeing proof of their own supposed superiority instead of understanding the unique internal logic of the society they were studying. The historical records we do have were almost exclusively written by the elite, the priests and the scribes in service of the king. Their accounts are the official, state-sanctioned version of events. They are powerful evidence, but they are also propaganda. The floor codes tell the story the king wanted told. The real, messy, human truth of dissent, of failed rituals, of unpopular rulers, is much harder to find. often lying in the silent gaps between the symbols or in the ruins of temples that were deliberately defaced and destroyed by their successors. This is why the interpretation is always evolving. A new dig might unearth a previously unknown tablet that completely upends our understanding of a symbol. A fresh look at a myth through a new theoretical lens might suddenly make sense of a perplexing pattern. It is a constant, fascinating dialogue between the trowel and the text, between the object in the ground and the story in the mind. A multifaceted endeavor that reminds us that understanding our past is never a simple task of reading a book, but of patiently assembling an infinite, cosmic jigsaw puzzle where many of the pieces are forever missing. Now, let's travel to a site that shatters our conventional understanding of this entire timeline. Nestled on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey lies Göbekli Tepe, a place so ancient and so revolutionary that it forces us to rewrite the first chapter of human civilization. This isn't a site from the age of pharaohs or the era of early city-states. Göbekli Tepe dates back a staggering 11,500 years, constructed by hunter-gatherers at the very tail end of the last ice age, a full 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was even a glimmer in an architect's eye. This places its construction firmly in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, a time when we have always believed humans were simple nomads concerned only with survival. But Göbekli Tepe tells a completely different story, one written in the language of its awe-inspiring, meticulously carved stone pillars and the symbolic code etched across its very floors. The first thing that strikes you about this site is its sheer, jaw-dropping ambition. We are not looking at a simple settlement or a few crude huts. We are looking at multiple, massive, circular enclosures built from tons of quarried limestone. At the heart of each of these circles stand enormous T-shaped monolithic pillars, some weighing over 20 tons. The engineering feat of moving and erecting these stones without the wheel, without metal tools, and without domesticated animals for labor is almost incomprehensible. It suggests a level of social organization and coordinated effort that historians never dreamed was possible for a society that hadn't even invented farming yet. The prevailing theory of history has always been a simple equation: agriculture first, then surplus food, then specialization, then complex society, and finally, monumental architecture and religion. Göbekli Tepe turns this entire sequence on its head. Here, it seems the temple came first. The human impulse to build a sacred space, to encode it with meaning, and to gather for a common ritual purpose may have actually been the catalyst that sparked the entire agricultural revolution, not the result of it. But the true code of this place, its secret language, is found in the breathtaking carvings that cover these pillars and the stone benches that line the enclosures. These are not abstract scratches. They are a menagerie of the ancient world, a stunningly detailed bestiary of predators and prey. We see foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, and vultures, all rendered with a masterful, confident artistry. These animals are not depicted in peaceful, pastoral scenes. They are often shown in dynamic, aggressive poses, filled with a palpable sense of power and danger. For decades, the lead excavator, the late Klaus Schmidt, championed a compelling interpretation. He saw these T-shaped pillars not as abstract symbols, but as stylized human figures. The T represents a head atop a body, the first known monumental sculptures of beings. The animal reliefs carved upon them, then, are not mere decorations. Schmidt proposed they were totems, symbolic representations of different hunter-gatherer clans. A pillar covered in snakes might represent the Snake Clan, while another adorned with fierce boars represents the Boar Clan. In this reading, Göbekli Tepe becomes a neutral, sacred ground where these different groups came together. It was, as Schmidt famously stated, a cathedral on a hill. a central place for social integration and collective myth-making. The act of collaborating to build something so grand would have forged a powerful shared identity among previously disparate bands of people. This interpretation points to the emergence of a very early proto-form of leadership, a ritual hierarchy. The largest, most central pillars in the enclosures, often the most elaborately carved, might represent particularly powerful or prestigious clan leaders. These individuals wouldn't have been kings in the later sense, with absolute power over a settled population. They were more likely ritual specialists or charismatic elders who could inspire and organize people. Their authority was not derived from controlling grain stores or leading armies, but from their perceived connection to the spiritual world, their ability to interpret the symbols, and their role in orchestrating the ceremonies that took place there. The floors of these enclosures, often made of hardened terrazzo like lime mortar, were the stage for these rituals. While we may not have a literal map carved into the floor, the entire layout was a coded environment. The placement of the pillars, the arrangement of the animals, the positioning of stone bowls that might have held offerings, all of it formed a three-dimensional text. To walk into one of these spaces was to enter a narrative, a story about the relationship between the human clans, the dangerous animal world they depended upon, and the spiritual forces that governed it all. So what does this mean for our story of divine kingship? Göbekli Tepe suggests that the core idea, that certain individuals can mediate between the community and a powerful, unseen world, is incredibly ancient, predating cities, writing, and even agriculture. The symbols of power here are not thrones and scepters, but the mastery of ritual and the control of sacred knowledge. The animal totems are the precursors to the later heraldic devices of royal houses. The collaborative building project is the ancestor of the corvée labor that would build the pyramids. Göbekli Tepe shows us that the human mind was already thinking in terms of cosmology, social order, and symbolic leadership long before we settled down. It provides the deep, foundational bedrock upon which the later, more familiar ideologies of Mesopotamia and Egypt would eventually be constructed. The god-kings of a later age did not invent the concept of sacred authority. They inherited it, refined it, and built upon a template that was already millennia old, a template first laid out in the mysterious, awe-inspiring stone circles of a hill in Turkey. From the stark, ancient hills of Göbekli Tepe, we now sail across the shimmering Mediterranean to a later, yet no less mysterious civilization that also used its flaws to tell a powerful story of divine authority. Our journey takes us to the sun-drenched island of Crete, to the magnificent and sprawling palace of Nossos, the legendary heart of the Minoan world. If Göbekli Tepe represents the dawn of this symbolic impulse, then Knossos shows it in full, spectacular bloom, a sophisticated, maritime empire where the very floors underfoot were a dynamic, interactive map of myth, power, and identity. Here, the code is not just carved into stone, it is woven into the entire experience of the palace, a labyrinth in both form and function, designed to proclaim the divine right of a king born from the sea. The first thing that strikes any visitor to Knossos, even today, is its sheer complexity. This was not a fortress or a singular, imposing monument like a pyramid. It was a vast, multi-storied administrative and ceremonial center, a hive of courtyards, corridors, and chambers that seemed to have no logical beginning or end. The man who first brought this world back to light, the British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans, who excavated the site starting in the early 20th century, immediately latched onto this quality. It was he who named this civilization Minoan after the mythical king Minos, and it was he who looked at the bewildering layout of the palace and saw a real-life embodiment of the labyrinth, the mythical maze built to contain the monstrous Minotaur. This was no coincidence. Evans believed the design was intentional, a physical manifestation of a political and spiritual truth. To be able to navigate this complex, both physically and symbolically, was a sign of belonging to the elite, of possessing the secret knowledge that separated the rulers from the ruled. The confusion it might cause an outsider was a feature, not a bug. It was an architectural demonstration of the king's unique role as the only one who could master the chaos and guide his people. This theme of mastering chaos is brilliantly expressed in the most famous artifact from the site, the Bull Leaping fresco. This dynamic wall painting depicts a breathtakingly dangerous acrobatic feat. A muscular bull is captured mid-charge, while a young athlete somersaults over its back, aided by two female assistants. For decades, this was seen as a depiction of a sport or a form of entertainment. But look deeper, and you see a powerful ritual encoded with meaning, one that was almost certainly performed in the central courts of the palace, making the floor itself a sacred arena. The bull was an immense, untamable force of nature, a symbol of raw, chaotic power. To vault over it successfully was not just a display of athletic prowess, it was a metaphorical conquest over chaos itself. Many scholars now see this as a central rite of passage, a crucial initiation ritual for the elite, and possibly even for the king himself. By physically enacting this victory on the symbolic stage of the palace courtyard, the participant, and by extension, the king who presided over the ceremony, proved their courage, their divine favor, and their fitness to lead. The floor of the court was the proving ground where a man could transform into a hero, legitimized by a public display of valor that echoed the foundational myths of their culture. And what was the source of King Minos' own legitimacy? The myths tell us it came directly from the sea. The story goes that King Minos prayed to Poseidon, god of the sea, to send a sign to affirm his right to rule. Poseidon answered by sending a magnificent white bull from the waves, which Minos was then supposed to sacrifice back to the god. Seduced by the bull's beauty, Minos betrayed his vow and kept it for himself, an act that led to the birth of the Minotaur and his wife Pasiphae's terrible curse. While this is a story of a broken oath, its underlying message is profound. The authority of the Minoan king was intrinsically linked to the sea and the god who controlled it. The Minoans were not just a people who lived on an island, they were a thalassocracy, an empire based on sea power. Their wealth, their influence, and their very identity were built upon their mastery of the Mediterranean waves. Their fleet was their strength, and control of trade routes was their lifeblood. The palace floors at Knossos are saturated with this marine identity. Walking through the corridors, you would have been surrounded by a stunning aquatic world. Frescoes and painted floors depicted dolphins gracefully arcing through stylized waves, octopuses with swirling tentacles embracing pottery, and schools of fish swimming in endless cycles. This was not just decorative whimsy, it was a constant, immersive reinforcement of a core political fact. The sea was not just their resource, it was their realm, and the king was its divinely appointed steward. The intricate, swirling patterns of the labyrinth designs on the floors themselves can even be seen as a symbolic representation of the sea, a confusing, unpredictable, and powerful force that only the most skilled navigator, the king, could chart a course through. Every glance downward was a reminder that their prosperity flowed from the deep, and that their leader held a unique, sacred covenant with Poseidon to keep that abundance flowing. The floor was a constant, silent prayer for calm seas and successful voyages, and a testament to the king's role as the essential mediator between his people and the tempestuous god of the deep. Sir Arthur Evans's interpretations, though sometimes criticized for being overly imaginative, captured an essential truth about Knossos. He saw the palace not just as a building, but as a narrative machine. Every painted wall, every strategically placed pillar, and every section of intricately designed pavement worked in concert to tell a story about order and chaos, about human skill and divine will, and about the singular importance of the ruler who stood at the center of it all. The architecture itself was the strongest piece of political propaganda, a physical environment that made the ideology of divine kingship inescapable and feel like a natural, eternal part of the world. To live and work within those walls was to be conditioned to accept the social order. The Minoans left behind no grand statues of conquering kings or stelae boasting of military victories. Their statement of power was far more sophisticated. It was written in the joyful leap of a dolphin on a fresco, in the dangerous dance with a bull in the courtyard, and in the confusing, captivating path of the labyrinth underfoot. It was a statement that true power came not from the sword alone, but from the sacred ability to navigate both the treacherous waters of the sea and the even more complex currents of myth, ritual, and human belief. Now let us journey to the banks of the Nile, where this concept of the temple as a cosmic engine reached its most magnificent and enduring expression. In the sprawling stone forests of Karnak and the majestic halls of Luxor, the Egyptian pharaoh did not just rule by divine right. He enacted his divinity with every step he took upon a sacred, scripted path. The floor of an Egyptian temple was far more than a surface. It was a meticulously designed spiritual circuit board, and the king was the living current that brought its power to life. Here, the abstract idea of the god-king was transformed into a tangible, repeatable, and utterly convincing ritual performance, with the very pavement beneath his feet serving as both his script and his proof. This entire process was a grand reenactment of the most important story the Egyptians knew, the daily journey of the sun god Ra. Just as Ra sailed his bark across the sky, bringing light and life to the world before descending into the underworld at night to battle chaos and be reborn at dawn, the pharaoh had to replicate this cycle to maintain the cosmic order, or Mad. The temple was the stage for this daily drama, and its architecture was its script. The floor played a crucial role in this. As one moved from the bright, open courtyard toward the inner sanctum, the floor often rose gradually while the ceiling lowered and the light grew dimmer. This was not an architectural quirk. This was a deliberate sensory experience. The rising floor forced your body to ascend, mimicking the primordial mound of creation emerging from the waters of none. You were not walking on flat ground. You were walking upward out of chaos and into the realm of pure, divine order. The darkness and confinement of the Holy of Holies represented the night, the underworld, and the hidden mystery of the god. The king's procession outwards again, back into the blinding sunlight of the courtyard, was his triumphant rebirth, mirroring Ra's victory at dawn. The symbols embedded and carved into these processional pathways were not mere decoration. They were sacred touchpoints, each one a battery of potent meaning that sanctified the royal footsteps. The most powerful of these was the Ankh, the symbol of life. Imagine the pharaoh in full regalia, his bare soles touching Ankh symbols inlaid into the stone floor. With each step, he was not just walking, he was physically absorbing divine life force, charging his very being with the power to sustain the kingdom. Then there were the kartaches, the oval loops that enclosed the king's throne name and birth name. To have one's kartach carved into the temple floor was an act of profound significance. It was a permanent declaration that this king, this specific individual, was the legitimate occupant of this sacred space and the rightful heir to this cosmic duty. It tied his mortal identity to the eternal cycles of the temple, ensuring that even after his death, his name and his essence would continue to resonate within these halls, receiving power and giving it back through the rituals of his successors. We can hear the echo of these rituals in some of humanity's oldest religious texts, the pyramid texts. Inscribed deep within the tombs of 5th and 6th dynasty pharaohs at Saqqara, these spells provide the narrative for the journey the floors physically guided. One spell, Utterance 302, powerfully declares, "A staircase to the sky is laid for him so that he may ascend to the sky thereon." This is not a metaphor. The rising temple floor was that staircase. Another text describes the pharaoh's transformation, stating he will ascend to the sky and unite with the sun disk. The architectural path and the mythological narrative were one and the same, a perfect fusion of stone and story designed to guarantee the king's successful transition into the divine realm, securing not only his own immortality but the continued stability of the entire world. Yet this system was not frozen in time. The brilliance of Egyptian divine kingship encoding was its remarkable adaptability over 3,000 years of history. While the core myth of the sun god's journey remained constant, its expression evolved to serve the political needs of the day. In the New Kingdom, for example, the powerful priesthood of Amun at Thebes effectively became co-rulers with the pharaoh. The floor plans and processional routes at Karnak grew exponentially during this period, becoming more complex and layered. This wasn't just expansion for grandeur's sake. It was a way to encode the increased power and complexity of the religious bureaucracy. More chapels meant more rituals, which required more priests, all of which reinforced the system's authority. Later, during the Amarna period, the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten attempted a radical rewrite of the entire code. He rejected the old pantheon of gods and the powerful priesthood of Amun, moving the capital to a new city dedicated solely to the sun disk, the Aten. In his new temples, the floor plans were completely different, open to the sky, with no dark sanctuaries, and lined with hundreds of altars for offerings directly to the sun. This was a dramatic recalibration of the symbolic language, an attempt to recenter all divine authority solely on the pharaoh himself as the sole interpreter of the Aten's will. Although his revolution was reversed after his death, it stands as a stark testament to how these architectural codes were living documents of political power, constantly being edited and updated. This incredible durability and flexibility is what makes the Egyptian example so profound. From the first dynasties to the conquest by Rome, the basic formula held: the temple floor was a map for a divine journey. It could accommodate new gods like the rise of Osiris in the Middle Kingdom, whose myth of death and rebirth added a new layer of meaning to the pharaoh's own mortuary rituals. It could be used to legitimize foreign rulers like the Nubian pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, who meticulously restored and followed the old processional ways to assert their legitimacy as true Egyptians. The code was so strong, so deeply embedded in the culture, that it could survive political upheaval, invasion, and even brief theological revolution. The stones of Karnak and Luxor tell a story not of a static, unchanging dogma, but of a brilliantly resilient system of belief, one that used the immutable language of architecture to navigate the ever-shifting currents of human power, ensuring that the divine journey of the king and the order of the universe it upheld would never truly end. Now, let's shift our gaze across the Atlantic to a world where the court was not a stage for solitary procession, but an arena for a violent, sacred game that echoed through the very foundations of society. In the heart of Mesoamerica, from the steamy lowlands of the Maya to the arid highlands of the Aztecs, the ballgame was far more than a sport. It was a profound ritual of creation, sacrifice, and renewal, and its court was a meticulously coded world stage where the fate of kings and cosmos hung in the balance. The soaring walls of the great ball court at Chichen Itza are not the sides of a mere stadium. They are the cliffs of the underworld itself, and the playing alley between them is the fragile plane of human existence, a liminal space where the divine and the mortal collided in a spectacular public drama. To understand the sheer weight of this event, we must first step into the mythology that gave it meaning. For the Maya, the most important story was the Popol Vuh, their epic of creation. At its heart is the tale of the hero twins, two clever, supernatural brothers who venture into the dark realm of Xibalba, the underworld, after their father and uncle are defeated and sacrificed by the lords of death. In Xibalba, the twins are forced to play a deadly ball game against these malevolent gods. Through their wit, courage, and magical prowess, the twins ultimately defeat the lords, but not before one of them is decapitated. In a stunning act of resurrection, the surviving brother retrieves the head and restores his sibling to life. Victorious, the twins then ascend to the sky to become the sun and the moon, bringing light and order to the world and paving the way for the creation of humanity. This was not just a story to be told, it was a story to be lived, and the ball court was the place to live it. Every time a game was played, it was a direct reenactment of this cosmic struggle. The hard, plastered floor of the court, known as the alley, represented the surface of the world. The two sloping walls that ran along its sides were the interface between this world and the terrifying chaos of the underworld. The heavy solid rubber ball, sometimes weighing as much as 8 or 9 pounds, was the sun itself, moving through its perilous nightly journey beneath the earth. The players, often nobles or even the king himself, were not merely athletes, they were the hero twins incarnate. They wore elaborate regalia, heavy padded belts, ornate headdresses that transformed them into mythic figures. Using only their hips, thighs, and elbows, they fought to keep the ball in play, their brutal, physical struggle mirroring the metaphysical battle between life and death, order and chaos, light and darkness. The outcome was never a simple matter of points, it was a divine verdict. This is where the game transcended sport and became the ultimate tool of political theater. The stakes were unimaginably high. Scholars like the renowned Mayanist J. Eric S. Thompson saw these events as brilliant public spectacles designed to manufacture consent for the ruling elite. Imagine the scene. The entire community would gather on the grand stone platforms overlooking the court. The air would be thick with the smell of copal incense and the deafening roar of the crowd. The king, adorned in jade and quetzal feathers, would take his place as the principal player or the master of ceremonies. The game itself was incredibly dangerous. Broken bones and severe internal injuries from the impact of the heavy ball were common. This physical risk was part of the spectacle, a visible demonstration of the elite's willingness to endure pain for the sake of the community. But the most potent moment, the one encoded most horrifically into the court's architecture, was the end. On the stone panels lining the walls of the court at Chichen Itza, we see vivid, chilling bas-reliefs. They depict players not in the act of playing, but in the act of dying. One figure, often identified as a victorious captain, holds the decapitated head of his opponent, from whose neck sprout 7 serpents, a powerful symbol of renewal and sacred life force. For a long time, it was assumed the losers were sacrificed. More recent interpretations suggest it may have been the captain of the winning team, or even a prisoner of war forced to stand in for the Lord of Death, who received this ultimate honor. The specifics are debated, but the symbolic message is crystal clear. The act of decapitation mirrored the fate of the maize god in the Popol Vuh, whose severed head, when placed in a calabash tree, bore fruit and brought forth new life. Sacrifice on the court was not an act of mere brutality, it was the essential spark for regeneration. The spilling of blood, the most sacred substance, was required to nourish the gods and ensure the sun would rise, the rains would come, and the world would continue. The king, by presiding over or participating in this ritual, was demonstrating his ultimate power. He was the master of this cycle of life and death. He could channel the chaos of the game into a life-giving outcome for his people. A victory proved his divine favor and his embodiment of the heroic twins. A well-executed sacrifice, even in defeat, showed his commitment to feeding the gods and maintaining cosmic order. The ball court floor, stained with the blood of ritual offering, was the ultimate proof of his sacred contract. It was a brutal, breathtakingly efficient system of legitimacy. The public, witnessing this intense drama unfold in a space designed to represent the entire universe, could not help but be awed into acceptance. The king was not just a political leader, he was the director of the most important story ever told, the one upon which their very lives depended. The carved stone markers set into the floor, often depicting bound captives or celestial symbols, were not just goalposts. They were permanent anchors of this ideology, ensuring that every game played thereafter would resonate with the same terrifying, necessary power. But if the ballgame was a dramatic public performance of myth, there existed another, quieter language of power encoded in temple floors, one that spoke not through the visceral thrill of sport, but through the silent, transcendent beauty of perfect form. This was the language of geometry, a universal code of shapes, ratios, and patterns that ancient cultures believed was the fundamental building block of the cosmos itself. To incorporate these sacred geometries into a temple floor was to literally build divine order into the foundation of a kingdom, creating a space where the mathematical harmony of the heavens was made manifest on earth, thereby offering irrefutable proof that the king who presided over it was himself an integral part of that eternal, perfect system. This belief that number and shape held a mystical, spiritual power is an idea with astonishingly deep roots. Centuries before the great temples of India or the mosques of the Islamic world, a Greek philosopher named Pythagoras and his followers were already teaching a revolutionary doctrine. For them, numbers were not merely tools for counting or measuring. They were the sacred, immutable elements from which all reality was woven. They discovered that the musical intervals the human ear finds most beautiful, the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth, could be expressed as simple, elegant ratios of whole numbers. If harmony in music could be mathematically defined, they reasoned, then surely the entire universe must also operate on these same principles of harmonic proportion. This led to the concept of the music of the spheres, the idea that the planets in their orbits produced a celestial symphony through their mathematical movements. A ruler, therefore, who built his sacred spaces according to these same ratios, was effectively tuning his kingdom to the music of the cosmos, aligning his temporal reign with the eternal and divine. His authority wasn't just claimed, it was acoustically and mathematically verified by the very fabric of existence. Nowhere is this philosophical principle made more tangible than in the floors of Hindu temples, through the creation of intricate symbolic diagrams known as yantras. A yantra is far more than a beautiful geometric pattern. It is a concentrated map of the universe and a tool for spiritual transformation. Before a single stone of a temple was laid, a master priest architect would begin by meticulously drawing the Vastupurusha mandala on the chosen site, a complex grid of squares that represented the cosmic being Purusha upon whom the temple would be built. This grid was the invisible, energetic blueprint for the entire structure, but its power was made visible on the temple floor in the form of smaller, more focused yantras, often inlaid in metal or carved into stone within the inner sanctum. These designs are composed of interlocking triangles, circles, squares, and lotus petals, all radiating from a central point, or bindu, which represents the absolute, unmanifest source of all creation. To sit and meditate upon such a yantra is to undertake a journey without moving a muscle. The practitioner's gaze is drawn from the outer, complex layers of the design, which represent the multifaceted, illusory world of the senses inward toward the serene, singular center of pure consciousness. The geometry acts as a spiritual ladder, guiding the mind from fragmentation to unity, from the mortal to the divine. For a king, the political function of this was profound. By placing his seat of power within a structure governed by the Vastupurusha mandala, and by performing rituals upon these geometric floors, he was physically situating himself at the very center of the cosmos. The yantra didn't just represent order, it generated it. His rule was therefore not a personal ambition but a cosmic necessity, a duty assigned to him by the mathematical and spiritual structure of reality itself. His every decree, in theory, was meant to ripple outward from that central point with the same perfect harmony and order inherent in the sacred diagram beneath his feet. A different but equally powerful expression of this geometric language flourishes in Islamic architecture, where an aniconic tradition avoiding the depiction of figurative images led to an extraordinary blossoming of abstract mathematical art. Walk into a great mosque like the Alhambra in Spain or the Shah Mosque in Iran, and your eye is immediately captured by the breathtaking complexity of the tilework covering every surface, including the floors. These are not random patterns. They are sophisticated tessellations of stars, polygons, and interwoven ribbons that seem to stretch into infinity. This is a visual representation of Tawhid, the fundamental Islamic concept of the absolute oneness and infinite nature of God. The repetition of a single, cleverly shaped tile across a vast expanse creates a pattern with no beginning and no end, mirroring the divine attributes of being without start or finish. The intellectual effort behind these patterns is staggering, requiring a deep understanding of advanced mathematics that European scholars would not discover for centuries. Artisans employed principles of symmetry and self-similarity, concepts we now associate with fractal geometry, to create designs that are perfectly ordered yet infinitely complex. To stand and pray upon a floor adorned with such a pattern is to feel oneself standing upon a fragment of eternity. It is a humbling and awe-inspiring experience that reinforces the majesty of the divine and, by extension, the authority of the ruler, the caliph or sultan, who commissioned the building as a testament to his piety and his role as God's representative on earth. His palace and mosque were not just seats of power, they were the physical epicenters of a divinely ordered universe, their very floors vibrating with the intellectual and spiritual certainty of sacred mathematics. This silent, swirling language of stars and polygons was a more powerful statement of legitimacy than any statue of a conquering hero could ever be, for it argued that the ruler's power was as natural, as inevitable, and as beautiful as the laws of mathematics that governed the turning of the stars in the sky. Imagine the profound sense of security it must have offered an entire civilization to know their king's actions were not arbitrary, but were instead meticulously choreographed by the silent, majestic, and predictable motion of the cosmos itself. This was the ultimate power of celestial mapping within sacred architecture. It wasn't enough for a temple to simply point toward the heavens. Its very floors had to become a functional, interactive chart of the sky, a mechanism that transformed abstract astronomical events into tangible, ritual experiences that directly validated the ruler's divine mandate. This practice turned the entire building into a colossal clock and calendar, with the king positioned as its essential, living gear. we can travel to the rolling green hills of Ireland to find one of the most breathtakingly precise examples of this ancient astronomical engineering. Newgrange, a massive passage tomb built over 5,000 years ago, long before the Egyptian pyramids, is a testament to a deep and sophisticated understanding of solar cycles. From the outside, it appears as a large, grass-covered mound, but its true magic is hidden within. A long, narrow passageway leads to a central cruciform chamber. The genius of its design is found in a small, inconspicuous feature above the entrance known as the roof box. For most of the year, the inner sanctum of Newgrange is plunged into utter darkness. But on the winter solstice around December 21st, something miraculous occurs. As the sun rises on the shortest day of the year, a single, narrow beam of sunlight pierces through this roof box. It travels down the length of the passageway, not hitting the walls or the ceiling, until it finally illuminates the central chamber and the intricate spiral carvings on the floor and stones for a precious 17 minutes. This was not an accidental alignment. The builders of Newgrange intentionally engineered this phenomenon with astonishing accuracy. The floor of that chamber was the focal point, the sacred screen upon which the promise of the sun's return was dramatically projected. For the ancient people who gathered there, this event was far more than a light show. It was the sun god himself entering the house of the ancestors to signal the end of winter's decline and the guaranteed rebirth of the land. The king or chieftain who presided over this ceremony was the master of this moment, the human conduit through which this life-giving cosmic power flowed back into the world. His authority was renewed each year not by his own decree, but by the sun's undeniable, predictable grace. This desire to hardwire leadership to the stars reached its most systematic and influential form in the ziggurats and temples of ancient Mesopotamia. Here, the floor was often a literal parchment for celestial observation. Babylonian priests, known as the Amanu, were not just religious figures, they were the world's first professional astronomers and astrologers. They meticulously tracked the movements of planets, which they viewed as gods, and recorded celestial omens on clay tablets. These observations were then often translated into physical form within the temple complex. Pavements could be inscribed with star charts mapping the constellations of the zodiac, which the Babylonians are credited with formalizing. Specific tiles or engraved lines might mark the rising point of the star Sirius or the path of the moon on an equinox. This encoded data was then used for the most critical of state functions, guiding the king. Their entire system of celestial divination was meticulously compiled into a series of tablets known as the Enuma Anu Enlil. This text was the ultimate royal advisor. It contained thousands of omens such as, if the moon is eclipsed on the first day of the month, the king will die and his son will not take the throne. Or, if Venus appears in the east in the month of Eru, there will be rains and floods. The king's every significant decision, from going to war to raising taxes to marrying, was scrutinized against the celestial calendar and these omens. His daily life was a performance dictated by the stars. If an omen predicted misfortune, he might perform a substitute king ritual, where a commoner would be temporarily placed on the throne to absorb the evil destiny before being executed, thus preserving the true king, who was too vital to the cosmos to be lost. This wasn't seen as superstition, it was a science of signs. It created an unassailable narrative of predestined leadership. The king wasn't just a political leader, he was a celestial actor playing a role written in the stars, and the temple floor was both his script and his stage. This deep-seated human yearning to find our place within a larger cosmic story, and to seek validation for our earthly struggles in the patterns of the heavens, is a thread that stretches unbroken from the dawn of civilization to our modern world. Why else does the daily horoscope remain one of the most widely read features in newspapers and websites across the globe? While we may no longer believe that the position of Mars dictates the fate of empires, millions of people still check their zodiac sign for guidance on their day, their relationships, and their careers. This enduring fascination speaks to a fundamental psychological need. In a world that can often feel random and chaotic, the idea that the universe has a plan, that there is a hidden order to events, and that we are connected to a vast, meaningful cosmos is profoundly comforting. The ancient kings of Babylon and the builders of Newgrange understood this need intimately. They masterfully channeled this universal human desire for cosmic connection into a powerful tool for social cohesion and political legitimacy. They offered their people a story where the king was the hero, the plot was written in the stars, and the temple floor was the page upon which this divine narrative was unfurled for all to witness and believe. So far, we have seen how temple floors could map the cosmos, track the stars, and stage public rituals. But some of the most powerful floors did something even more direct and personal. They told a story. They transformed the stone beneath one's feet into a sprawling, graphic novel of myth, where the central hero was none other than the king himself. These were not mere decorations. They were narrative blueprints for leadership, depicting a perilous journey of quest and transformation that the ruler was expected to emulate. This practice turned abstract divinity into a relatable human drama of struggle, making the king's claim to power a story of earned heroism rather than simply inherited privilege. We can find one of the world's oldest and most profound examples of this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the magnificent Assyrian palaces of Nineveh and Khorsabad, like that of the great King Sargon II, archaeologists have uncovered vast stretches of stone panels that once lined the lower walls and floors of throne rooms and processional ways. These panels are not blank, they are carved with a continuous, gripping narrative. We see the hero Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk, locked in combat with fantastic creatures, mighty lions, ferocious bulls, and the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, Humbaba. For an Assyrian ruler like Sargon, this was far more than a favorite story. Gilgamesh was the archetypal king. His journey was the ultimate parable of leadership. The epic is, at its heart, a story about a tyrant who transforms into a true hero. Gilgamesh begins as a brutal, arrogant ruler, but through his deep friendship with the wild man Enkidu and his confrontation with the terrifying reality of death, he learns wisdom, empathy, and the solemn responsibility of caring for his people. By having these scenes underfoot and surrounding him, Sargon was constantly walking in the footsteps of this legendary prototype. He was reminding himself and every courtier and ambassador who entered that true kingship was not about unchecked power, but about the hard-won transformation from a brute into a wise and compassionate shepherd of his people. The floor served as a permanent moral compass, pointing the way toward virtuous rule. A similar, though culturally distinct, tradition flourished in the Greek world. While not always on floors, the principle of heroic narrative as a guide for leaders was deeply embedded in their sacred and royal spaces. The 12 labors of Hercules, for instance, were a ubiquitous theme in Greek art, adorning everything from temple metopes to vase paintings in spaces frequented by the elite. Hercules was the ultimate Greek hero, but his story is one of immense struggle and penance. His labors were not a series of glorious adventures, but a brutal atonement for a terrible crime committed in a fit of madness. Each labor, slaying the Nemean lion, cleaning the Augean stables, capturing Cerberus from the underworld, was a trial that required not just strength, but cunning, perseverance, and a willingness to descend into the darkest places, both literally and metaphorically. For a Greek king or tyrant, this narrative provided a crucial framework. It presented leadership as a series of seemingly impossible, often thankless tasks. It taught that a ruler must be prepared to get his hands dirty, to confront the monstrous problems that plagued his kingdom, and to rely on wit as much as force. The journey to the underworld, in particular, was a potent symbol. A leader who could metaphorically confront death and return, as both Hercules and Gilgamesh did, was a leader who had mastered the greatest human fear and could therefore guide his people through any crisis. These stories argued that the right to rule was earned through trials that tested one's character to its absolute limit. This concept of the flaw as an instructional narrative reaches a breathtaking scale in the Great Borobudur Monument in Java, Indonesia. While technically a Buddhist stupa and not a temple to a king, its design philosophy is a masterclass in using a walking path to narrate a transformative journey. Borobudur is constructed as a massive, three-dimensional mandala. A pilgrim does not enter a building. They begin at the base and literally walk upward, following a predetermined clockwise path along 4 square galleries filled with over 2,500 narrative relief panels and 500 statues of Buddha. The journey is the story. The bas-reliefs on the lower levels depict the worldly life of the Buddha, filled with scenes from the Jataka tales that show his previous lives and the lessons of karma. As the pilgrim ascends, the narratives become more abstract and spiritual, the panels fewer, until they reach the circular terraces at the top, which are devoid of imagery altogether. Here, the pilgrim is surrounded by silent, latticed stupas, having moved from the world of form and story into the realm of pure formlessness and enlightenment. While built for spiritual seekers, this architectural principle is a perfect metaphor for the king's mythic journey. It physically maps the path of transformation from a worldly ruler concerned with power and politics, the base of the monument, to an enlightened being who acts as a universal monarch, a Chakravartin, whose rule is in perfect harmony with the cosmic order. To walk this path was to internalize the entire philosophy of enlightened leadership, learning that true power culminates not in control, but in self-mastery and release from desire. Ultimately, these narrative flaws and pathways functioned as the ancient world's most immersive training manual. They were not for the general public's entertainment, but for the elite's constant edification. A young prince would have grown up walking across these stories, absorbing their lessons through his very footsteps. They taught that leadership was inherently traumatic. It required facing one's own mortality, losing one's closest companions, and making impossible choices. The stories of Gilgamesh weeping over the dead Enkidu or Hercules in a moment of despair personalized the immense psychological weight of command. This was a powerful counter-narrative to the idea of a distant, invulnerable god-king. It showed a ruler who suffered, who doubted, and who struggled, making his ultimate success a testament to his very human resilience. This made his authority far more relatable and legitimate. His power was not just handed to him by the gods, it was forged in the fires of a heroic trial that everyone, from the lowest farmer to the highest noble, could understand on a fundamental storytelling level. The flaw ensured that the king's most important myth was not just one he told, but one he lived every single day, embedded in the very stones of his palace. But a king's power did not just rest on his connection to the cosmos or his performance in a ritual. It also depended profoundly on his connection to the past. In a world without mass media or instant communication, how could a ruler prove he was the rightful heir, the chosen one in a long line of chosen ones? The answer was carved into the very ground he walked upon. Temple floors became a powerful and permanent public record, a stone-chiseled family tree designed to visually document a royal lineage, weaving the current ruler's name into an unbroken chain that stretched back through history, often all the way to the gods themselves. This was the ultimate tool for manufacturing dynastic legitimacy, transforming a potentially shaky claim to the throne into an incontrovertible fact of the universe, as solid and enduring as the stone it was etched upon. One of the most striking and clear-cut examples of this practice is found in the Temple of Seti I at Abydos in Egypt. In a corridor now known as the Gallery of Lists, Seti and his famous son, Ramesses II, are shown alongside a meticulously ordered list of their royal predecessors. But this is no simple history lesson. The list is a masterclass in political propaganda. Noticeably absent are the names of certain pharaohs deemed illegitimate or problematic, like the female ruler Hatshepsut or the heretic Akhenaten and his immediate successors. Their reigns have been literally chiseled out of history, erased from the stone record. This act of selective memory, this carving of a curated truth into the floor, was a powerful statement. It presented Seti's rule not as a matter of recent political fortune, but as the direct, logical, and preordained culmination of a sanitized, perfect lineage. A visiting noble or priest walking that corridor would be surrounded by the names and cartouches of 76 kings, an overwhelming visual argument for the stability and divine right of the current regime. It screamed a simple, powerful message. This is the way it has always been, and this is the way it must always be. This practice served two incredibly practical political functions. First, it was a powerful tool for preventing disputes over succession. In cultures where the rules of inheritance could be fluid and contested by multiple sons or rival branches of a family, a public, stone-carved genealogy in the most sacred place imaginable acted as a preemptive strike against challengers. It was the ancient equivalent of a legally binding will, etched in a forum where challenging it would be tantamount to blasphemy. Second, it created what the famed sociologist Max Weber called traditional authority. Weber identified this as a form of leadership where power is accepted because it has always been that way because of an eternal yesterday. The sanctity of tradition justifies the ruler's command. By encoding this tradition into the temple floor, the king made this argument physical and inescapable. The weight of history itself seemed to press down from the stones, making rebellion not just a political risk, but a violation of the natural and sacred order of things. The floor became a mechanism for social control, conditioning everyone who walked upon it to accept the status quo. The methods of encoding this genealogical claim were as varied as the cultures that used them. It wasn't always a straightforward list. In many Mesopotamian cultures, the connection to a mythical or divine ancestor was often represented through a powerful symbol, the sacred tree. This wasn't a literal family tree as we imagine it today, but a highly stylized, often fantastical plant, like the Assyrian tree of life. A king standing before or beneath this tree, sometimes even tending to it, in artwork on palace walls and floors, was making a profound statement. He was portraying himself as the latest, vital fruit on a divine branch, the current custodian of a life-giving lineage that stretched back to the very source of creation. His power was organic, natural, and nourishing to the kingdom, just as the tree was to the world. In medieval Europe, this concept evolved into heraldry. The intricate coats of arms laid into the floors of great cathedrals and castle halls were not just decorative logos, they were a complex visual language of genealogy. Every color, animal, and pattern signified a marriage alliance, a military victory, or a claim to a specific territory inherited from an ancestor. To walk over these emblems was to tread upon a compressed history of a dynasty's accumulated power and prestige, a constant reminder of the bloodline that owned the very ground beneath your feet. This deep-seated human impulse to root power in pedigree is far from a relic of the ancient world. we see its echoes everywhere in modern leadership. Constitutional monarchs today derive their entire legitimacy from their bloodline, their authority still largely based on that Weberian concept of traditional authority. But even in democracies where power is supposedly earned, not inherited, politicians frequently leverage a different kind of genealogy. They craft narratives of humble, hardworking ancestors who embodied national values, or they emphasize their connections to founding fathers or historical periods perceived as golden ages. A political dynasty like the Kennedys or the Bushes in the United States benefits from a name that itself carries a weight of history and expectation, a modern form of heraldry. Companies, too, use this tactic, boasting of being a family business since 1890, to imply stability, trustworthiness, and a legacy of quality. This forces us to ask a critical question, one the ancients would have understood perfectly. Is the story of our lineage, whether carved in stone or repeated in campaign ads, a record of truth or a tool for power? And are we, when we accept these narratives, walking a path that was designed for us long before we ever arrived, our footsteps falling in line with a history that someone else very carefully wrote? Yet for all the grandeur of these god-kings and the stone-coded narratives that supported them, a crucial question remains: who held the pen that wrote this story into the floor? The answer lies not with the ruler alone, but with the powerful, often shadowy class that stood beside the throne, the priesthoods. These were the true architects and custodians of the symbolic codes, the master technicians of the sacred, who wielded the immense power that comes from being the sole interpreters of divine will. To understand the full picture of divine kingship, we must pull back the curtain to reveal these learned advisors, for the relationship between the king and his priests was never a simple one of command and obedience. It was a delicate, constant, and often fraught negotiation for the ultimate prize: control over the minds of the people. Imagine the immense, esoteric knowledge required to create these symbolic landscapes. This was not a weekend hobby. Designing a temple floor that accurately mirrored the solstices required generations of precise astronomical observation. Encoding a creation myth into a labyrinthine pattern demanded a deep, scholarly understanding of every nuance of the story. Choosing the correct protective symbols to sanctify a king's coronation path involved a mastery of complex theological texts and oral traditions. This was the exclusive domain of the priesthood. They were the ancient world's intellectual elite: the astronomers, the mathematicians, the engineers, the historians, and the mythographers. Their entire lives were dedicated to building, maintaining, and expanding this vast library of sacred knowledge, a library that was often deliberately written in a symbolic language only they could fully decipher. This created a profound dependency. A king might have the army, but the priests held the keys to the cosmos. They were the operating system, and the king was merely the most important user. Without their expertise to consecrate his coronation, interpret an omen in his favor, or perform the rituals that ensured the Nile would flood, his reign was built on sand. This dynamic placed priests in the ultimate position of kingmakers. A powerful priesthood could anoint a ruler, and it could just as easily destroy one. We see this played out with stunning clarity in the civilization of ancient Mesopotamia. Here, the priests, particularly the Baru or divination priests, were the ultimate political advisors. Their entire statecraft was based on the science of omens. Before any major decision, going to war, signing a treaty, even raising taxes, the king had to consult the Baru. The priest would perform an elaborate ritual, often involving the sacrifice of a sheep and a meticulous examination of its liver. The shape, markings, and imperfections of the organ were believed to be a direct message from the gods, a celestial text that only the trained eye of the priest could read. The power this afforded them was staggering. A pessimistic reading of a liver could delay a military campaign indefinitely, undermining a king's authority and making him look weak and out of favor with the gods. A favorable reading could send the army to victory, solidifying his power. The priest held the interpretive key, and with it, the ability to steer state policy from the quiet of the temple, all under the unassailable guise of simply being the messenger of the divine. This interplay between the secular and the sacred took on a different but equally potent form in ancient Egypt. The priesthood of Ammon at Thebes grew so wealthy and influential during the New Kingdom that they effectively became a state within a state. The Temple of Karnak was not just a religious center, it was an enormous economic engine owning vast tracts of land, fleets of ships, and legions of workers. The high priest of Ammon was one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, often a close relative of the pharaoh himself, appointed to the position to keep this rival power center within the royal family's control. This was a precarious balancing act. The pharaoh was the god, but the priests were his handlers, the managers of his divinity. They controlled the daily rituals that sustained his godhood. They managed the wealth that funded his projects. They wrote the hymns that praised his name. A pharaoh who lost the support of the Ammon priesthood risked losing his divine legitimacy and the immense economic resources that came with it. This delicate dance of power reveals the fundamental truth that divine kingship was rarely absolute. It was a partnership, and sometimes a tense one, where the throne relied on the temple to maintain the illusion of its own unquestionable authority. Perhaps no single figure in the ancient world exemplifies the priestly role as a neutral, supra-political conduit of divine truth better than the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi in Greece. For centuries, kings, generals, and colonists alike would make the arduous pilgrimage to this remote sanctuary, bringing lavish gifts to ask a single question of the god Apollo, spoken through his priestess. The entire ceremony was a masterpiece of sacred theater, designed to maximize the aura of mystery and authenticity. While we have no explicit floor plans of the Aditon, the inner chamber where the Pythia gave her prophecies, scholars have long speculated that the space was meticulously designed. Some theories suggest a fissure in the rock floor may have emitted intoxicating vapors that induced her trance. Others propose intricate floor patterns might have guided her movements or helped focus the energy of the space. The precise mechanics remain one of history's great mysteries, but the outcome is clear. The Pythia's often cryptic pronouncements, filtered and interpreted by the male priests of the temple, shaped the course of Greek history. She was the ultimate check on power. A king might have an army, but he could not conquer a prophecy. He had to humble himself before the priestess, acknowledging a power greater than his own. The priests of Delphi, by controlling access to her and interpreting her words, became the ultimate brokers of political legitimacy in the Greek world, a reminder that even the most ambitious ruler was still subject to a higher, inscrutable order that only a dedicated priestly class could hope to navigate. What is truly staggering as we journey from the sun-baked plazas of Mesoamerica to the cool, dark sanctums of Egyptian temples is not the differences we find in their floor codes, but the profound and eerie similarities. It is as if cultures separated by vast oceans and millennia, with no possible point of contact, were all humming the same haunting, universal tune, using different instruments but the same fundamental notes. This is the power of comparative mythology. It allows us to step back and see the grand, interconnected tapestry of human belief, where the same primal fears, hopes, and understandings of power were expressed through a shared symbolic language etched into stone. A serpent coiling around a cosmic egg in a Hindu temple floor mandala is not so different from the feathered serpent Kukulkan carved into a Mayan step, and both whisper a similar truth about the cyclical nature of time and creation. Why would a symbol like the serpent appear again and again, from the jungles of Cambodia to the highlands of Peru, almost always as a representation of both immense power and potential danger? In the Hindu tradition, the serpent Shesha is a celestial being, a mighty king of all Nagas, who floats in the cosmic ocean and serves as the bed upon which the god Vishnu rests between cycles of creation. His countless hoods form a protective canopy, and his body coils symbolizing the endless, dormant energy of the universe. Here, the serpent is order, protection, and the foundation of divine rest. Yet, in the same tradition, a serpent also represents Kundalini energy, a raw, chaotic force coiled at the base of the spine that must be carefully awakened and guided upward toward enlightenment. This duality is the key. The serpent is the ultimate symbol of transformation. It sheds its skin, representing death and rebirth. It moves without limbs, a creature of both the earth and the underworld, able to navigate realms others cannot. For a king, aligning himself with this symbol through floor art was a way of claiming mastery over these fundamental, terrifying, and life-giving forces. He was the one who could harness the chaotic energy of the serpent and channel it into protective, orderly rule. Now, journey to the other side of the world, to the Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan. Here, the plumed serpent deity, known to the Maya as Kukulkan and to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl, is rendered in stunning, undulating reliefs. This is not a beast of pure evil to be slain, but a complex creator god associated with wind, Venus, the dawn, and learning. His image on the temple floor and walls declared that the rulers of Teotihuacan were the heirs to this divine wisdom and creative power. The serpent's ability to shed its skin connected it to the planet Venus's cyclical disappearance and reappearance in the sky, a celestial event meticulously tracked and celebrated. The king, by walking a path adorned with this symbol, was physically tracing the journey of the planet and the god, demonstrating his role in maintaining this sacred cycle of death and rebirth for his people. The serpent in both India and Mesoamerica becomes a bridge between earth and sky, chaos and order, death and life. The fact that two such distant cultures landed on the same multifaceted symbol to encode royal divinity is nothing short of breathtaking. This phenomenon of shared symbols extends far beyond serpents. Consider the universal archetype of the world mountain or axis mundi. In India, this is Mount Meru, the central axis of the universe in Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist cosmology. Temples are often designed as symbolic representations of this mountain, with their floors acting as the base of the world. The very act of entering and ascending through the temple is a spiritual climb toward the summit of existence. In Mesopotamia, the zigurate was this same concept made physical, a massive, man-made mountain with a temple at its peak, literally connecting the earthly city to the heavenly realm. The king's ritual ascent of the zigurate's ramps, a journey likely mirrored in the processional pathways on its levels, was a reenactment of this cosmic journey, a performance of his role as the connector between humanity and the gods. Even in cultures without literal mountains, the symbol persists. The Egyptian pyramid was a solidified ray of sun and a primordial mound, the first land to emerge from the waters of chaos. The king buried inside was placed at this very point of origin, his eternal presence anchoring the ordered world to its moment of creation. The shared use of this center of the world symbol suggests a deep psychological need to orient oneself within the cosmos, to find a fixed point in a seemingly chaotic universe. The king, through the architecture he commissioned, offered himself as that fixed point. So how do we explain this? How do we account for these stunning parallels that defy any simple explanation of cultural diffusion? Two towering 20th century thinkers offer compelling, though different, frameworks. The psychologist Carl Jung proposed the theory of the collective unconscious. He suggested that beneath our personal conscious minds lies a deeper, species-wide layer of the psyche that is inherited, not learned. This collective unconscious is populated by primordial images and patterns of thought called archetypes. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the self, these are not specific stories but fundamental, universal forms that shape how we experience the world. The serpent, the world mountain, the labyrinth, these are the symbolic expressions of these archetypes. According to Jung, an ancient priest in India and a shaman king in Mesoamerica were both tapping into the same deep psychic wellspring. They were giving form to the same innate human understanding of power, transformation, and the structure of reality, which is why their symbols, though dressed in different cultural clothing, feel so familiar to us even today. The mythologist Joseph Campbell, deeply influenced by Jung, took this idea and gave it a narrative structure with his concept of the monomyth, or the hero's journey. Campbell argued that all the world's hero myths, from Gilgamesh to Buddha to Jesus, follow a similar pattern: a call to adventure, a descent into a strange world, a series of trials, a confrontation with a supreme power, and a return home with a boon for humanity. This, Campbell argued, is a metaphor for the journey of self-discovery and transformation that every human being must undertake. The temple floor, then, can be seen as a physical map of this internal, psychological journey. The labyrinth is the confusing path of trials. The central sanctuary is the confrontation with the divine. The return along the processional way is the bringing of wisdom back to the community. The king, by ritually walking this path, was not just claiming political power. He was publicly enacting the ultimate human journey, proving he had undergone the necessary psychological death and rebirth to earn the right to lead. His legitimacy came from having symbolically completed the journey every person intuitively knows is the path to wholeness. This global perspective does more than just enrich our narrative, it fundamentally changes it. It suggests that the impulse to encode divinity in leadership is not a historical anomaly or a cynical political trick. It is a fundamental, perhaps even innate, aspect of human civilization itself, a profound expression of our deepest psychological need to find meaning, order, and heroes to guide us through the terrifying and magnificent mystery of existence. Yet for all their permanence carved in stone, these intricate systems of divinely coded authority were not destined to last forever. The very forces they helped to unleash, urbanization, intellectual curiosity, and imperial ambition, would eventually become the instruments of their own unraveling. The story of divine kingship is not one of a sudden collapse, but of a slow, inexorable erosion, where the sacred glue that once bonded a ruler to the cosmos gradually lost its potency, leaving the coded floors of temples as beautiful, but increasingly incomprehensible, relics of a fading world. One of the most powerful solvents eating away at this ancient order was the rise of critical, philosophical thought, particularly in the city-states of ancient Greece. Here, in the bustling agora rather than the quiet temple, a revolution of the mind was taking place. Beginning around the 6th century BC, pre-Socratic philosophers like Thales and Anaximander made a breathtaking intellectual leap. They began to propose that the universe operated not according to the whims of capricious, human-like gods, but through impersonal, discoverable natural laws. Thales suggested water was the fundamental substance of all things. Anaximander proposed the concept of the apeiron, the boundless. This was a monumental shift. The cosmos was no longer a dramatic narrative of divine. wills but a complex machine whose workings could be understood through observation and reason. This new worldview created a new kind of authority figure, not the priest-king who communed with the gods, but the sage who understood nature's logic. A citizen listening to these debates might start to look differently at the processional pathway in a nearby temple. The carefully laid symbols promising a connection to the divine began to seem like superstition compared to the elegant, if nascent, theories of geometry and physics emerging in the public square. The floor's code wasn't broken, it was simply rendered irrelevant by a more compelling explanation for how the world worked. This philosophical challenge was followed by a political one that would reshape the entire Mediterranean world, the rise of Rome. The Romans were brilliant pragmatists and masterful assimilators of conquered cultures, but their approach to divinity and leadership fundamentally diluted the potent, localized magic of earlier sacred coding. Initially, Roman religion was a contractual, practical affair, a series of rituals performed correctly to maintain the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. There was little room for the kind of deep, personal, mystical identification between a single ruler and a god that characterized pharaonic Egypt. This changed with the advent of the empire, but in a way that ultimately cheapened the concept. Emperor worship, beginning with Augustus, was less about a genuine belief in the emperor's cosmic divinity and more a brilliant, centralized tool for ensuring loyalty across a vast and diverse empire. A citizen in Gaul or Britain was expected to offer a pinch of incense to the statue of the emperor, not because they believed he was a god in the way Ra was a god, but because it was a test of political allegiance, a symbolic act of submitting to the machinery of the Roman state. This transformed divine authority from a profound, locally rooted cosmological principle into a shallow, administrative form of control. The intricate floor codes of an Egyptian temple, which told a specific, deep story about a specific pharaoh's journey with a specific god, had no place in this new, homogenized imperial cult. The symbols became generic, their power drained by their very ubiquity and political utility. This gradual fading of the old world is captured eloquently by the historian Peter Brown, whose work on the end of antiquity describes not a violent death but a change of skin. He writes of the late Roman world as a period where the classical city, with its ancient pagan heart, slowly faded, and new forms of community and belief, particularly Christianity, rose to take its place. This was a long, drawn-out process of transformation, not a single catastrophic event. We can see this change of skin in the fate of the temple floors themselves. In many cases, they were not destroyed but were simply built over, their coded messages buried under new layers of construction, both literal and ideological. A Christian basilica might be constructed directly on top of a mithraeum, its plain floor covering the intricate astrological symbols of the pagan mystery cult beneath. The new faith offered a different kind of sacred space, one focused less on encoding a ruler's cosmic journey and more on the communal gathering of the faithful. The authority of the Christian emperor, like Constantine, was derived from his service to the one true God, not from his embodiment of a sun god's journey. The medium of legitimacy had shifted from silent, symbolic stone to spoken creed and sacred text. This historical arc from encoded mystery to philosophical inquiry to bureaucratic state cult holds up a distant mirror to our own modern experience of secularization. We too live in a world where overarching, metaphysical narratives that once gave divine sanction to power have lost their universal hold. The scientific revolution did to the medieval Christian world what Greek philosophy did to the ancient mythic one. It provided a new, evidence-based framework for understanding the universe that made older, faith-based explanations seem less sufficient for many people. This doesn't mean belief disappeared, but its role in public political legitimacy was forever altered. The divine right of kings was gradually replaced by the consent of the governed and the cold logic of legal constitutions. A modern leader's authority is in theory derived from laws, elections, and economic performance, not from a ritual walk across a star chart floor or a claimed descent from a deity. We have dismantled the sacred stage, but the human need for meaning and order that built it remains, often finding new expression in the secular religions of nationalism, political ideology, or even the cult of celebrity. The stones of Karnak and the forums of Rome remind us that the symbols of power are always temporary, but the desire to believe in them and to be led by those who master them is a constant thread in the long, evolving story of human society. For centuries, the profound language of these temple floors remained silent, buried under desert sands, jungle overgrowth, and layers of forgotten history. Their rediscovery is a story not of a single moment, but of a slow, thrilling reawakening, a detective story spanning generations where each new clue has dramatically rewritten our understanding of the human past. This grand unveiling began not with scientists, but with a new breed of adventurer, the antiquarians and explorers of the 18th and 19th centuries, figures of immense courage and often questionable ethics. Among the most colorful was the Italian giant Giovanni Battista Belzoni, a former circus strongman turned tomb raider. With brute force and relentless determination, he muscled his way into Egyptian tombs and temples, becoming one of the first Europeans to lay eyes on their inscribed floors in millennia. His methods were destructive by today's standards, often involving hasty excavations and the removal of artifacts for European museums. But his published accounts and drawings sent shockwaves through a fascinated Western world, igniting a public obsession with ancient codes and lost civilizations. He represented the first raw wave of discovery driven by treasure and spectacle, but inadvertently setting the stage for the science to come. The true turning point, the key that began to unlock the meaning behind the symbols these explorers found, was of course the Rosetta Stone. Discovered in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt, this unassuming slab of black basalt became the most important linguistic key ever found. Its genius was its triple inscription, the same decree written in ancient Greek Demotic script and, crucially, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Scholars instantly recognized that Greek could be used to crack the code of the hieroglyphs. It took the brilliant, painstaking work of Jean-François Champollion over 2 decades to make the final breakthrough, officially deciphering the script in 1822. This was not an academic exercise, it was a revolution. Suddenly, the countless hieroglyphs covering temple walls and, most importantly for our story, their floors, could be read. The cartouches encircling kings' names, the Ankh symbols promising life, the intricate descriptions of rituals, they all transformed from mysterious artwork into a readable language. The floor of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, for instance, covered in detailed texts describing its own foundation ritual, could now be understood. Champollion's work gave a voice to the stones, allowing the ancient Egyptians to explain their own world, their beliefs, and their divine kingship in their own words for the first time in over 1,000 years. The pace of this rediscovery has only accelerated in our own time, moving from the realm of strongmen and lone geniuses into a new era of dazzling, non-invasive technology. The most revolutionary of these tools is undoubtedly LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. This technology involves mounting a laser scanner on an aircraft and flying it over a dense forest or jungle. The lasers penetrate the canopy, bouncing off the ground below and returning to the sensor to create an incredibly detailed 3-dimensional map of the Earth's surface. effectively allowing archaeologists to digitally strip away the vegetation. The results have been nothing short of miraculous. In the jungles of Guatemala, LiDAR surveys of the Maya region have revealed tens of thousands of previously unknown structures, houses, palaces, fortifications, and vast networks of raised causeways. Most importantly, it has revealed the full, staggering scale of ancient Maya ball courts, their plastered floors and sloping walls hidden for centuries, showing that the ritual game of life and death was far more widespread and central to their society than we ever imagined. This technology allows us to see the ancient landscape as a whole, to understand how a ceremonial pathway encoded in one temple floor might have connected to a distant royal palace or a sacred cenote, rewriting entire chapters of history without ever putting a shovel in the ground. Of course, technology only provides the raw data. The true magic of modern archaeology lies in the collaboration, the bringing together of wildly different experts to solve a common puzzle. A dig at a site like Göbekli Tepe is no longer just the domain of the field archaeologist. It is a symphony of specialists. A geoarchaeologist might analyze the chemical composition of the temple floor plaster to determine its source. A zooarchaeologist studies the tiny fragments of animal bones found embedded in that plaster to understand which species were present and how they were used. A philologist or mythologist then takes those findings and compares the animal symbols on the T-shaped pillars to creation myths from across the region, searching for shared narrative threads. Meanwhile, a digital artist works with the team to create a three-dimensional model of the entire site, allowing them to test theories about sightlines and processional routes. It is this interdisciplinary conversation between the hard data of the soil and the abstract world of story that allows us to move beyond simply finding a coded floor to truly interpreting its role in the society that built it. The stones provide the what, but it takes this village of experts to uncover the why. This incredible power of discovery comes with a profound and growing responsibility, a set of urgent ethical considerations that modern archaeologists can no longer ignore. The first is preservation versus publication. The very act of unearthing these delicate floor inscriptions exposes them to the elements, sun, wind, rain, and the corrosive breath of millions of tourists risking their rapid deterioration. Is it better to excavate a beautiful mosaic floor for the world to see, knowing it may fade within a generation, or to leave it protected and buried for future scientists with better conservation technologies? Then there is the fraught issue of cultural patrimony. For decades, artifacts and even large sections of temple walls were removed from their countries of origin to fill the museums of Europe and America. The ongoing debate over the Parthenon marbles is the most famous example of this. There is a growing and entirely justified movement to repatriate these objects, arguing that they are an essential part of a living cultural heritage and belong in their land of origin. Furthermore, modern archaeologists must work with local communities, not just around them. They are not just hired labor on a dig, they are stakeholders. Their oral histories, their traditional knowledge, and their connection to the land can provide invaluable context that no satellite image or soil sample ever could. The goal is no longer just to extract knowledge, but to be a guest, a caretaker, and a partner in preserving a heritage that ultimately belongs to everyone and no one, a fragile, non-renewable resource that is our collective memory of humanity's first and most enduring questions about power, meaning, and our place in the universe. But what if we could do more than just map these silent stones? What if we could actually step back in time and walk those sacred pathways ourselves, to see the vibrant colors that have long since faded, to witness the rituals that brought these coded floors to life? This is no longer the stuff of fantasy. We are living in a new golden age of discovery, not in the field with a trowel, but in the digital realm with a processor. Cutting-edge technology is now granting us a power that would have seemed like pure magic to even the most ambitious antiquarian. The ability to resurrect these ancient spaces in stunning, immersive detail, allowing us to experience them not as dusty ruins, but as the living, breathing centers of power they were always meant to be. This digital revolution begins with the painstaking work of laser scanning. Teams of specialists now travel to these sites armed not with shovels, but with tripods and sophisticated LiDAR and photogrammetry equipment. They methodically scan every inch of a site, from the grandest column to the tiniest crack in the floor, capturing billions of precise data points. This creates a point cloud, a hyper-accurate digital twin of the ruin as it exists today. But this is just the skeleton. The next step is where the true artistry and science converge. Digital humanists, a new breed of scholar who bridges the gap between computer science and the humanities, take over. They become digital detectives, applying layers of evidence to this skeletal frame. They consult ancient texts that describe the vibrant paints used: ochres, lapis lazuli, cinnabar red. They analyze microscopic pigment fragments still clinging to the stone. They study contemporary artwork and compare stylistic motifs across the ancient world. Slowly, carefully, they digitally restore flaked-away paint, reconstruct collapsed columns, and even simulate the flickering torchlight that would have danced across these surfaces during a nighttime ceremony. The result is not a guess. It is a rigorously researched, scientifically informed hypothesis of the past, rendered in breathtaking visual detail. Consider the ongoing work with the Parthenon in Athens. For centuries, we have known this iconic temple was once awash in color, but we could only imagine it as the pure white marble that defined neoclassical ideals. Now, digital projections can accurately map brilliant blues, reds, and golds onto its surface during light shows, stunning audiences and fundamentally changing our perception of Greek austerity. But the real magic is happening with the floor and the famed Parthenon frieze. Digital reconstructions allow scholars to virtually experiment with the placement of the frieze slabs, which were originally located high up on the exterior of the cella wall. By creating an interactive 3D model, they can test sightlines from the perspective of an ancient worshipper walking the processional way on the floor below. Was the narrative of the Panathenaic procession meant to be read in a specific sequence as one moved? Did the placement of certain figures align with astronomical events or sightlines to other monuments? This technology turns the temple into a dynamic laboratory, allowing us to test theories about ritual experience and symbolic communication in ways that are impossible with the static, scattered remains in a museum. The applications are even more transformative for sites that are too fragile, too remote, or too reconstructed to be fully understood. Take the ancient Maya city of Capan in Honduras. Its hieroglyphic stairway, a massive flight of steps carved with over 2,000 glyphs that tell the history of the city's dynasty, has suffered from collapse and erosion. Early attempts at physical reconstruction in the 20th century inadvertently placed many blocks in the wrong order, scrambling its historical narrative. Digital archaeologists have now laser scanned every single block. Using the scans, they can manipulate 3D models of the stones in a virtual space, testing thousands of potential arrangements against known grammatical rules of Mayan writing to finally piece the story back together correctly. This allows them to virtually rebuild the stairway not as it is, but as it was, providing a flawless reading of this crucial royal history that was literally written into the very fabric of the city's central acropolis. Perhaps the most profound impact of this technology is its power to democratize access to our shared cultural heritage. For most people on Earth, visiting the remote Valley of the Kings in Egypt or the protected caves of Lascaux in France is an impossible dream. But now, through high-resolution online archives and immersive virtual reality experiences, anyone with an internet connection can don a headset and stand in the burial chamber of Tutankhamun, or look up at the majestic bulls painted on a cave wall 17,000 years ago. Museums worldwide are creating digital twins of their collections, allowing you to spin a priceless carved artifact around on your screen, examining the symbols on its base and underside that are never visible in a traditional glass case. This breaks down the barriers of geography, wealth, and physical ability, turning global cultural heritage into a truly open resource for students, scholars, and the endlessly curious. It fosters a new, global form of interpretation, where a researcher in Tokyo can collaborate in real time with a colleague in Mexico City inside a virtual model of a Teotihuacan apartment compound, their avatars pointing out details on the floor murals as if they were standing in the same room. Yet, this incredible power also raises complex and fascinating questions about authenticity. Is a perfect digital copy as real as the weathered, crumbling original? Does experiencing a temple through a VR headset, with its guaranteed perfect weather and lack of crowds, provide an authentic sense of the place, or is it a sterile simulation that loses the emotional weight of true presence? There are no easy answers. A digital reconstruction is by its nature an interpretation. The choices of which colors to use, how bright to make the torchlight, even which sounds of chanting to include in the ambient audio, are all made by the modern team creating the experience. We are, in a very real way, creating a new version of the past, one that is inevitably filtered through our own modern sensibilities and technological capabilities. But perhaps that is the point. These digital tools do not replace the original. They become a new medium for an ongoing conversation with it. They allow us to ask better questions, to see connections we never could before, and to ensure that these fragile, coded flaws continue to inspire awe and inquiry for generations to come, long after the last speck of pigment has finally faded from the stone. But if you think this ancient practice of encoding power in symbols and space ended with the last pharaoh or the fall of the Roman Empire, look around. The language has simply evolved, trading stone for screens and sacred scripts for sound bites. The core human impulse remains utterly unchanged. Modern leaders may not claim descent from a sun god, but they are master architects of a new mythos, building their authority not with ziggurats, but with brands, narratives, and carefully staged rituals that tap into those same deep, primal wells of belief and belonging. We have not abandoned the template of divine kingship. We have simply secularized it, and the temple floors we walk on today are the pervasive environments of media and architecture that shape our perceptions every single day. Consider the most overt example, political ritual. Every 4 years, the United States engages in a ceremony of immense symbolic power with the presidential inauguration. The setting is deliberately chosen, the west front of the U.S. Capitol building. The president-elect places a hand on a Bible and swears an oath, a spoken spell that transforms a citizen into a commander-in-chief. This is followed by a procession down Pennsylvania Avenue, a literal walking of the path of power for the crowds to witness. The entire event is a modern-day version of the pharaoh's procession at Karnak. It is a ritual of transformation, designed to manufacture a sacred aura around a secular position, using tradition, solemnity, and pageantry to elevate the leader above the ordinary and cement their legitimacy in the public consciousness. It is a powerful, non-verbal argument that says, this is not just a person, this is your president, and it works on a level far deeper than any policy paper ever could. The architecture that houses this power is equally coded. The U.S. Capitol Dome is not an accident of design. It is a direct architectural descendant of the Pantheon in Rome, a temple to all the gods. Its rotunda, with its soaring canopy and apotheosis paintings, deliberately borrows the language of sacred space to lend a sense of grandeur, permanence, and transcendent purpose to the messy, partisan business of lawmaking. A member of Congress doesn't just go to work, they ascend the hill and enter a secular temple, a physical environment designed to impress upon them and every visitor the weight and majesty of the institution. This is what the media theorist Marshall McLuhan meant when he famously said, "The medium is the message. The building itself, the medium, communicates a message of stability, legacy, and divine favor long before a single law is ever debated." It is a silent, stone-carved argument for its own authority. This encoding extends far beyond Washington. The most potent modern kings are not always politicians. They are the heads of global corporations, and their temples are their brands. A company logo is the modern equivalent of a royal car touch. The Apple logo is not just a picture of a fruit. It is a symbol of innovation, simplicity, and a certain countercultural coolness that its adherents, its subjects, wear with pride. The ritual is the product launch, a carefully choreographed spectacle where a high priest, like a Steve Jobs clad in a black turtleneck, unveils the latest sacred object to an awed congregation. The mythology is the story of the garage startup that changed the world, a classic hero's journey narrative that legitimizes the company's immense power and wealth. This is the essence of what political scientist Joseph Nye termed soft power, the ability to shape the desires of others through attraction and persuasion rather than coercion. It is power derived from culture, values, and policies that appear legitimate in the eyes of others. Ancient kings had soft power too. It was the allure of their connection to the gods, the beauty of their temples, and the compelling stories told on their floors. Today, it is the allure of a lifestyle brand, the beauty of a sleek device, and the compelling story of innovation and destiny. The most pervasive and powerful temple floor of our time, however, is the digital landscape. Social media platforms are the new ceremonial plazas, and a leader's feed is their continuous coronation procession. Every post, every curated image, every viral moment is a symbol carefully placed to construct a narrative. A photo of a leader reading to children encodes compassion. A video of them walking confidently with other world leaders encodes strength and diplomacy. The constant scrolling stream of content creates a mediated reality, an environment that, as McLuhan warned, works us over completely. It is a space where perception is meticulously managed, where myth is manufactured in real time, and where the line between the person and the persona is deliberately blurred. The ancient priest had to carve his symbols in stone once. The modern media team can cast theirs into the global consciousness 1,000,000 times a second, adjusting the narrative with algorithmic precision. This is the ultimate evolution of the coded floor. It is dynamic, responsive, and terrifyingly effective at shaping the reality in which we believe we are making free and independent choices. So what do we do with this understanding? The goal is not to become cynical, but to become literate. We must learn to see the codes again. The next time you watch a political ad, don't just listen to the words. Look at the background. Are they standing in front of a farm, a factory, a flag? These are not neutral choices. They are symbolic appeals to identity and values. When you walk into a grand government building or a corporate headquarters, don't just see a building, feel its effect. does the high ceiling make you feel small? Does the polished marble floor make you feel like you are in a sacred, important space? That is the architecture working on you, just as the rising floor of Karnak worked on an ancient supplicant. We are all walking the labyrinth now, but the walls are made of light and information. The most powerful skill we can cultivate is the ability to stop, to look down at the digital and physical floors beneath our feet, and to ask the most dangerous and liberating question of all: who designed this path, and what story are they trying to make me believe? Yet for all their breathtaking beauty and profound spiritual insight, these encoded floors have a darker, more unsettling dimension that we cannot afford to ignore. They were not always neutral maps of the cosmos. Often, they were the ultimate tools of propaganda, meticulously designed to broadcast a single, unchallengeable version of reality that served those in power. This is where our awe must be tempered with a critical eye, for the same symbols that promised order could also be wielded to justify oppression, to erase entire histories, and to silence any voice that dared to question the official story. The temple floor, in these instances, becomes less a sacred text and more a stone-carved decree, its message not an invitation to wonder but a command to obey. We can see this brutal clarity in the grand palaces of the Assyrian Empire, a civilization that mastered the art of state terror. In the reign of Ashurnasirpal II, the floors and walls of his palace at Nimrud were covered with a very specific kind of narrative. One recurring scene shows the king, larger than life, standing triumphantly over a vanquished enemy. In some, he is drawing his bow against foreign foes. In others, he is ceremonially hunting lions, a symbol of his power to conquer chaos. But the most chilling panels are those that depict the aftermath of battle with gruesome, documentary-like detail. We see Assyrian soldiers leading captured prisoners, stacking heads of the slain into grim pyramids, and even flaying rebels alive. The accompanying cuneiform inscriptions leave no room for interpretation. They boast of the king's might, describing how he erected a pillar of living men and of heads, and covered the pillars with the skins of my enemies. This was not a hidden message. It was a public, in-your-face declaration of power. By walking these halls, foreign ambassadors and subject princes were meant to understand the consequences of defiance. The message was simple and terrifying. Resistance is futile, and your fate will be carved into the very stones of my home for all eternity. The floor's code was a weapon of psychological warfare, embedding the king's brutal authority into the architecture itself and presenting his violence not as cruelty, but as a divine mandate necessary for maintaining order. This manipulation of symbols to suppress and control took on a more insidious form during the age of colonialism. When European explorers and missionaries encountered the sacred sites of indigenous cultures in the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they often profoundly misread the symbolic codes they found. A perfect example is the complex spiral and labyrinth patterns found in many Native American petroglyphs and earthworks, such as those at Choco Canyon. For the ancestral Puebloans, these designs were likely rich with meaning, maps of migrations, charts of celestial cycles, or representations of spiritual journeys. To the colonial gaze, however, they were often dismissed as primitive doodles, demonic symbols, or simply ignored altogether. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was an active act of epistemic violence, the suppression of one way of knowing to elevate another. By refusing to engage with the complexity of these symbols, colonial powers could justify their own actions. They could argue they were bringing civilization to a people without history, without sophisticated thought, and without a legitimate claim to the land they inhabited. The true meaning of the floor codes was erased, and in its place a new, self-serving narrative was written, one that legitimized displacement, conversion, and exploitation. The stones themselves were silent witnesses to a cultural takeover, their original stories buried under a foreign interpretation. This brings us to a crucial philosophical question so powerfully explored by the 20th century French thinker Michel Foucault. He argued that knowledge is never neutral or objective. Instead, it is inextricably linked to power. We should admit, he wrote, that power produces knowledge. That power and knowledge directly imply one another. There is no power relation without the correlative constitution of a field of knowledge, nor any knowledge that does not presuppose and constitute at the same time power relations. Foucault's insight is a key to unlocking the darker side of these ancient codes. The priesthood that decided which symbols to carve, the king who commissioned a specific narrative of his reign, the scribe who chose which royal name to include on a king list. These were not just artists and historians. They were actors in a system of power, actively producing a specific kind of knowledge that would, in turn, reinforce their own authority. The temple floor is the ultimate field of knowledge that Foucault describes. It is a controlled environment where only one truth is permitted to exist, a truth that benefits the ruler and his elite. It is a stark reminder that history is not a passive record of what happened. It is an active, curated argument for why things should stay the same. This forces us to confront some deeply uncomfortable and enduring questions. Who, in any era, gets to be the storyteller, whose version of events is carved in stone, and whose is swept into the dustbin of history? The victor may write the history books, as the saying goes, but they also commission the monuments and design the sacred spaces. They get to literally set their story in stone, creating a seemingly permanent and authoritative record that can drown out dissenting voices for centuries. When we look at these ancient floors today, we are almost always seeing the world through the eyes of the powerful, the pharaohs, the emperors, the priestly elites. The perspectives of the common farmers, the slaves who quarried the stone, the dissenting priests, the conquered peoples, their stories are almost entirely absent from this official record. Their truth was written on more perishable materials, in songs, oral histories, and everyday practices that rarely survived the ravages of time. This imbalance should give us pause. It asks us to look at these magnificent ruins not just as treasures to be admired, but as arguments to be critically examined. We must learn to read the gaps and the silences, to wonder what was deliberately left out, and to question the glorious, unified narrative being presented. For if we accept that these codes were tools of culture, we must also, with clear eyes, acknowledge that they were, just as often, instruments of profound and lasting control. Yet for all their resilience in surviving millennia, these ancient stone narratives now face a battery of modern threats that are far more relentless than any invading army. The very elements that once seemed to honor them, the sun, the rain, the earth itself, are turning against them with a new, human-induced ferocity. Climate change is no longer a distant theory, it is a present and active vandal. In places like the magnificent temple complex of Karnak, increasingly frequent and intense flash floods, a phenomenon linked to a warming climate, now routinely inundate the sacred precincts. This isn't just a matter of water pooling on the stones. The murky, contaminant-laden floodwater seeps into the microscopic pores of the sandstone, carrying with it destructive salts. As the water evaporates under the hot Egyptian sun, these salts crystallize inside the stone itself. This crystallization creates immense internal pressure, a slow, inexorable force that prizes the stone apart from within, causing the intricately carved hieroglyphs and symbols on the floors to blister, flake, and eventually crumble into dust. The process is silent and invisible, a chemical warfare waged against the very memory of the pharaohs. Similarly, in the Arctic, where permafrost has preserved incredible organic artifacts for thousands of years, rising temperatures are causing the ground to thaw for the first time. Wooden structures and tools that were frozen in time are now rapidly rotting away as they are exposed to air and microbes, erasing a unique chapter of human history before archaeologists can even properly document it. Alongside this environmental siege is the relentless pressure of our own admiration. Mass tourism, while a vital source of revenue and global interest, has become a double-edged sword. The soft scuff of tourist shoes, multiplied by millions of footsteps each year, acts like a sheet of fine grit sandpaper, gradually but surely wearing down the crisp edges of carved symbols. The constant vibration from buses and the heavy footfall of crowds can destabilize ancient foundations and cause microfractures in delicate mosaics. Even the very breath and body heat of large crowds packed into a small, enclosed space like the famous Lascaux cave in France, which had to be closed to the public, can alter the delicate microclimate that has preserved priceless artwork for 17,000 years, encouraging the growth of destructive mold and lichen. This love is literally crushing the objects of its affection. And then there is the more blatant criminal threat, looting. The illegal antiquities trade is a multi-billion-dollar global enterprise, and temple floors are not immune. Thieves will often use power tools and saws to brutally extract a single, valuable carved panel or mosaic section, heedlessly destroying the surrounding context and the overall narrative of the floor to grab a single prize for a wealthy, anonymous collector. This is not archaeology, it is intellectual amputations, tearing a single beautiful phrase from a sacred text and discarding the rest of the book. In the face of these overwhelming challenges, a global effort has emerged to fight back, often led by organizations like UNESCO and its World Heritage Center. Their work goes far beyond simply placing a prestigious plaque at the entrance to a site. The act of inscribing a location like Petra in Jordan or the Forbidden City in China onto the World Heritage List is a powerful tool for protection. It raises the site's international profile, which can help mobilize expert resources and funding, but it also brings a level of global scrutiny that can pressure national governments to act as responsible stewards and discourage destructive development projects. UNESCO also coordinates complex multinational conservation missions, bringing together the world's leading experts in stone preservation, hydrology, structural engineering, and chemistry to diagnose problems and implement solutions. Their work is a delicate ballet of ancient wisdom and space-age technology. At the Tomb of the Kings in Cyprus, for instance, conservators are using nanotechnology, injecting a specially formulated calcium hydroxide solution in a nanoparticle form into the decaying marble. These tiny particles migrate deep into the stone and then recrystallize, essentially acting as a glue that rebonds the decaying material from the inside out, strengthening it without altering its appearance. This is medicine on a molecular scale, a desperate attempt to heal the patient without leaving a scar. Perhaps the most powerful and often most controversial tool in the preservation toolbox is the concept of relocation. The most famous example is the immense international campaign to save the Abu Simbel temples in Egypt in the 1960s. As the rising waters of the Nile behind the new Aswan High Dam threatened to submerge the colossal statues of Ramesses II forever, UNESCO led a Herculean effort to literally cut the entire temple complex into massive blocks, move them to higher ground, and reassemble them like the world's most precious jigsaw puzzle. It was a stunning feat of engineering that saved the temples from certain destruction. However, the ethical debate it sparked is still very much alive today. When is it acceptable to move a monument from its original sacred context? At Abu Simbel, the answer was clear-cut. It was move them or lose them forever. But what about the Parthenon marbles removed from Athens by Lord Elgin in the early 19th century and now housed in the British Museum? The Greek government argues they are looted cultural property, violently severed from their architectural and narrative home, and that their meaning is diminished by being viewed in a cold, foreign museum gallery rather than against the attic sky. The museum argues they are preserved treasures, saved from the far greater damage they would have sustained from pollution and war had they remained in place. There is no easy answer, and each case forces a painful choice between physical preservation and cultural integrity. This global effort, however, is increasingly recognizing that the most crucial ingredient for long-term survival is not found in a laboratory or a boardroom in Paris, but in the local communities who live in the shadow of these great monuments. The top-down, foreign expert model of conservation is giving way to a more collaborative approach that prioritizes community stewardship. When local people are empowered, trained, and employed as site guardians, conservators, and tour guides, their relationship with the monument changes. It transforms from being a distant, government-owned relic into a source of local pride, identity, and economic livelihood. In Peru, communities near the Nazca lines have formed volunteer patrols to guard against vandals and looters, protecting the vast geoglyphs they now see as their own inheritance. At the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia, the preservation work is deeply integrated with the daily life and rituals of the Ethiopian Orthodox priests and the townspeople, for whom the sites are not a tourist attraction but a living, breathing center of their faith. This sense of ownership is the ultimate safeguard, a community that sees its own future intertwined with the preservation of its past will fight to protect it long after the international aid money has dried up and the experts have gone home. It is a lesson in humility for the global conservation movement that the most durable preservation strategy is not to build a higher fence, but to nurture a deeper connection, ensuring that these stone-coded stories are not just artifacts behind glass, but active, valued participants in the ongoing story of the people who live alongside them. Imagine a classroom not of desks and whiteboards, but of sprawling, interactive maps where students don't just read about myths, but walk through them. This is the transformative power of bringing temple floor codes into education, turning abstract stories of gods and heroes into a tangible, multi-sensory learning experience. The key is moving beyond the textbook and allowing students to become the code breakers themselves. An educator might start not with a lecture, but with a challenge, projecting a high-resolution image of a labyrinth design from the Minoan palace of Knossos onto the floor. As students walk its path, they aren't just moving, they are physically reenacting the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. This immediate, kinesthetic connection transforms the story from a distant tale into a personal journey. The question is no longer what happened, but what did it feel like to be in that story? This approach taps into the very purpose of these ancient designs to be experienced, not just seen, and in doing so, unlocks a deeper, more intuitive understanding of the narrative's power and psychological weight. The tools for this are more accessible than ever. Museums worldwide are leading the charge with incredible success. The British Museum's Virtual Visits program, for instance, allows students in classrooms across the globe to take a live, guided tour of the Assyrian galleries via video link. A specialist educator can zoom in on the stone panels that once lined palace floors, showing in stunning detail the scenes of King Ashurnasirpal hunting lions. But it doesn't stop at observation. The session becomes an interactive workshop where students are tasked with decoding the symbols. What does the lion represent? Why is the king shown as so much larger than his attendants? What message does this send about his power? This isn't a passive field trip. it's an active archaeological inquiry. Similarly, the Getty Museum offers printable, foldable 3D paper models of ancient structures. Students can literally build a Roman temple, assembling its floor plan and seeing how the geometric patterns orient toward the altar, physically constructing the relationship between sacred space and ritual practice. This methodology naturally fosters a cross-disciplinary learning environment that is the holy grail of modern education. A single temple floor becomes a nexus point for half a dozen subjects. The mathematical precision of the geometric patterns, the golden ratios in a Greek meander, or the fractal complexity of an Islamic jiri tile becomes a thrilling applied math lesson. The astronomy behind solstice alignments, like at Newgrange, integrates precise science with cultural belief. The study of the materials themselves, the quarrying of limestone, the chemistry of Egyptian blue pigment, the engineering required to move 50-ton stones, opens a window into ancient technology and economics. Suddenly, history isn't a siloed class about dates and dead people. It's a vibrant, integrated story about human ingenuity. Students aren't just learning facts, they are learning how to think like a historian, an artist, an engineer, and a mythologist all at once, understanding that knowledge in the real world is never neatly compartmentalized. Ultimately, the greatest lesson these stone codes teach is one of critical thinking about power structures, both ancient and modern. Decoding a pharaoh's cartouche on a processional pathway is the starting point for a much larger conversation. Who commissioned this? Who was allowed to walk this path? What story were they trying to tell? And perhaps more importantly, what story were they trying to erase? This shifts the student's role from a passive acceptor of history to an active interrogator of it. They learn to look for the gaps and the silences. After analyzing the perfect, sanitized king list of Seti I at Abydos, with its deliberate omissions, a teacher can pivot to a discussion of modern propaganda, media literacy, or the way corporate logos and government architecture use symbolism to project authority and trust. The ancient floor becomes a primer for deconstructing the persuasive codes that surround us all today, from political campaign ads to the design of a shopping mall. This is the ultimate educational application, using the past as a training ground to cultivate discerning, thoughtful citizens who understand that every symbol, every story, and every space is designed with an intention, and that the most powerful skill anyone can possess is the ability to ask, why? But how do modern scholars even begin to make sense of such a vast and varied symbolic language, spanning continents and millennia? How do we move from simply admiring a beautiful pattern to truly understanding its deeper, universal grammar? The answer lies not in the soil of the excavation site, but in the realm of powerful theoretical frameworks developed in the 20th century. Two of the most influential approaches come from the fields of structuralism and symbolic anthropology, which provide us with a kind of intellectual X-ray vision, allowing us to see the hidden skeletons of meaning that give these ancient codes their shape and power. These theories propose a radical idea that the human mind, regardless of culture or era, is wired to make sense of the world through a limited set of fundamental patterns. The symbols on a temple floor are not arbitrary decorations. They are the physical expressions of these deep, cognitive structures. The pioneering work of the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss is absolutely foundational here. He argued that the human mind is a binary processor at its core, instinctively organizing the chaotic flow of experience into pairs of opposing concepts. We constantly define things by what they are not. Life is defined against death, culture against nature, the sacred against the profane, the raw against the cooked. Lévi-Strauss believed that myth, and by extension the symbolic art that illustrates myth, is a sophisticated cultural machine designed to mediate these terrifying, irreconcilable oppositions. It creates a bridge between the two poles, allowing a society to live with the inherent contradictions of existence. Now, let's apply this lens to a temple floor. Imagine the layout of a classic Egyptian temple. The entire complex is a physical manifestation of this binary thinking. The noisy, crowded, sunlit courtyard represents the realm of the profane, the everyday world of people. The dark, silent, restricted inner sanctum represents the sacred, the inaccessible realm of the god. The rising floor of the processional way is the mediating element. It is the literal and symbolic path that connects these two opposing worlds. It transforms the binary opposition into a gradient, allowing for a controlled, ritual transition from one state to the other. The king, walking this path, is the ultimate mediator, the human who becomes divine, the living resolution to the fundamental conflict between mortal and immortal. The floor isn't just decorated, it is a diagram of a universal thought process. Building on this, the brilliant British anthropologist Mary Douglas offered another essential key to decoding these spaces in her seminal work, Purity and Danger. Douglas focused on the human body as a primary model for society. She argued that every culture possesses a deep, often unconscious, sense of the body as a bounded system. What is inside is us, what is outside is other, and what crosses the boundary can be either nourishing or dangerous, sacred or polluting. This body metaphor is then projected outward onto the social and cosmic order. The temple, therefore, is not just a building, it is a symbolic body. Its walls are the skin, defining a pure, ordered inside against a chaotic, potentially polluting outside. The floor takes on a critical role in this scheme. It is the internal landscape of this cosmic body. The specific pathways become like circulatory systems, directing the flow of sacred energy, or like neural pathways carrying ritual instructions. The different rooms and their floor designs can represent different organs with different functions. A chamber for offerings is like a stomach. A room for oracles is like a mind. Douglas's theories help us understand why the floors are so meticulously coded. Any breach of this symbolic body, a crack in the floor, an unauthorized person stepping off the ritual path, a misplaced offering, wasn't just a mistake. It was a metaphysical injury, a polluting violation of the cosmic order that had to be ritually cleansed. The patterns are a map of a social and cosmological anatomy. These frameworks move us beyond simply listing symbols to understanding their relational logic. Take, for instance, the ubiquitous labyrinth pattern found from ancient Crete to medieval cathedrals. A structuralist reading sees it as the ultimate symbol of mediation. Its single path twists and turns, creating a visceral experience of confusion and chaos, but it always, eventually, leads to a singular, ordered center. It physically makes you live the journey from confusion to clarity, from the profane maze of life to the sacred certainty at its heart. A Douglas-inspired reading might see the labyrinth as a symbolic intestine, a controlled, bounded channel for processing and purifying the initiate before they can reach the holy core, the spiritual heart of the structure. These theories give us the vocabulary to see that two cultures using a similar symbol might be working through the same fundamental human problem, even if their specific myths and gods are entirely different. This doesn't mean every interpretation is set in stone. The great value of these theoretical frameworks is that they are tools for generating questions, not providing final answers. They give us a disciplined way to interrogate the silent stones. When we see a geometric pattern on a Hopi Kiva floor or a Celtic spiral on a tomb, we can ask, what binary oppositions is this design mediating? How is it using the human body as a model for the universe? Is it mapping a social hierarchy onto a cosmological one, creating a powerful argument that the king's place at the top of society is as natural and ordained as the sun's place in the sky? This academic layer transforms archaeology from a treasure hunt into a profound dialogue with the past. It shows that our interpretation of these ancient codes is not guesswork. It is guided by robust, intellectually rigorous traditions that seek to uncover the universal structures of the human mind itself, revealing that the most awe-inspiring temple floor is, in the end, a mirror reflecting the deepest patterns of our own thought. Yet for all we have uncovered, the most thrilling chapter in this story is the one we have not yet written. The silent stones have yielded many of their secrets, but they guard their deepest mysteries with a stubborn resolve, presenting us with tantalizing puzzles that defy even our most advanced tools. These are not just academic curiosities, they are locked doors, and behind any one of them could lie a revelation that completely rewrites the history of human civilization and our understanding of power itself. The greatest adventure lies not in what we know, but in what we have yet to discover. Consider the maddening silence of certain ancient scripts. The Minoans of Crete, with their magnificent palace at Knossos, left behind two writing systems. The later one, Linear B, was cracked in the 1950s, revealing an early form of Greek used for administrative lists, but its predecessor, Linear A, remains one of the world's great undeciphered codes. We can recognize its signs: a stylized eye, a warrior's helmet, a ship, but the language it represents is a complete enigma. Is it a unique, lost language? Is it related to languages from Anatolia or elsewhere? Every attempt to break it has failed. The clay tablets inscribed with linear are often found in ritual contexts, leading some scholars to speculate they contain religious hymns, sacred laws, or the very myths that were enacted on those labyrinthine floors. Deciphering linear wouldn't just give us a vocabulary list. It would give us the voice of the priests who designed the rituals, the original script for the divine performance of Minoan kingship. It could finally tell us what the bull-leaping ceremony truly meant, not through our modern interpretation, but in the words of the people who lived it. This isn't a closed case, it's a conversation waiting to happen, and the key to starting it might already be sitting in a museum drawer, waiting for a fresh pair of eyes or a brilliant new algorithmic approach to linguistic pattern recognition. On the other side of the world, the Andes Mountains hold their own secrets, etched into stone and woven into the very landscape. The Nazca lines are the most famous massive geoglyphs of spiders, monkeys, and birds visible only from the sky. But lesser known and perhaps more profound are the countless abstract symbols and geometric patterns found at sites like Chavin de Huantar or the high-altitude city of Tiwanaku. These are not illustrations, they are a symbolic language we cannot read. They appear on temple walls, on monoliths, and crucially, on the floors of ritual plazas. Were they astronomical charts? Maps of underground water sources. A complex system of musical notation for rituals we can no longer hear. Some researchers, like those using advanced 3D modeling, are beginning to hypothesize that these floor carvings were not meant to be seen so much as felt, that ceremonial participants might have danced upon them in a state of ritual trance, their feet tracing the patterns to achieve an altered state of consciousness. This suggests a form of divine kingship where the ruler's power was not just political or military, but shamanic, based on an ability to navigate spiritual realms. Unlocking this code could reveal an entire philosophy of power rooted in a connection to the earth and the cosmos that is utterly different from the models we know from Egypt or Mesopotamia. The tools for this great unlocking are arriving at a breathtaking pace. We are no longer limited to the magnifying glass and the educated guess. Imagine artificial intelligence trained on every known symbol from every documented culture, scanning through millions of images at a speed no human could ever match, searching for previously invisible patterns and connections. This isn't science fiction. Projects are already underway using machine learning to compare Indus Valley script with other undeciphered systems, looking for a statistical Rosetta Stone. Paleogenetics, the study of ancient DNA, offers another revolutionary path. By analyzing the genetic material from skeletal remains found in and around these coded temples, we could trace the movement of people and ideas. Did the priestly class at Göbekli Tepe belong to a distinct genetic group? Was the knowledge of sacred geometry carried by a specific lineage from one culture to another? This biological data could map the migration of myths themselves, showing us how the idea of the god-king traveled and transformed across continents and millennia. And then there is the role of our changing planet. While climate change poses a dire threat to existing sites, it is also, paradoxically, acting as the greatest archaeologist of our time. Severe droughts are causing water levels to drop in reservoirs and lakes around the world, revealing sites that have been submerged for centuries. In Iraq, receding waters have exposed a 3,400-year-old Bronze Age city, its walls and foundations emerging from the Tigris River. Melting glaciers in the Alps are releasing perfectly preserved artifacts from the Iron Age, and thawing permafrost is revealing frozen tombs. Each of these discoveries, forced into the light by a warming world, is a potential game changer. What if a future drought reveals a library of linear tablets? What if a melting ice patch in the Andes reveals a frozen mummy clutching an object that finally explains the meaning of those cryptic stone carvings? The Earth itself is becoming an active participant in this story, reluctantly giving up its deepest held secrets. This forward momentum invites us to dream, to ask the biggest questions of all. What if these encoded floors are more than just maps of power? What if they are maps of the mind, the recurring patterns? The spirals, the labyrinths, the mandalas are not just cultural artifacts. They are archetypal forms that appear in human art and meditation across the globe. The neuropsychologist Michael Winkelmann has argued that the ubiquity of these forms suggests they are hardwired into human consciousness, emerging naturally during altered states brought on by ritual, rhythm, or psychoactive plants. Could it be that the ancient priest kings were not just claiming a connection to the gods, but were actually pioneering cartographers of inner space? Were their temples and their coded floors designed as externalized models of the neurological pathways to enlightenment, a technology for guiding the brain into a state of transcendent unity? This is perhaps the most profound mystery of all, that in their quest to touch the divine, these ancient rulers may have been unconsciously charting the very architecture of human perception itself, leaving behind a legacy written in stone that is, in the end, a mirror reflecting the deepest, most uncharted territory of all our own minds. The dig is far from over. The next great discovery might not come from a remote desert, but from a lab, a satellite image, or a melting ice field, and it is waiting for the next curious mind to ask the right question. And so our journey across these ancient floors comes to a close, not at an ending, but at a point of reflection. We began by feeling the cool, carved stone beneath our feet, a silent language waiting to be heard. We traced that language back to its source, to the dawn of civilization itself, where the revolutionary idea first took root that a leader could be more than a man, that he could be a bridge to the divine, a necessary anchor in a chaotic world. We saw how this belief was not merely spoken, but built, encoded into the very fabric of sacred space. The temple became a cosmic engine, its floor a meticulously designed circuit board where every symbol, from the precise spiral to the powerful serpent, was a conduit of meaning, a component in a grand machine designed to generate legitimacy and order. We walked the processional pathways of Egypt, where the rising floor lifted the pharaoh toward his destiny, and stood in the roaring ball courts of Mesoamerica, where a game was a lethal drama of life, death, and renewal. We marveled at the silent, staggering age of Göbekli Tepe, which dared to suggest that the temple predated the city, that the impulse to build in the service of a higher power might be the very spark that ignited civilization. We saw how this sacred coding was a global phenomenon, a chorus of different cultures humming the same universal tune of the hero's journey, the world mountain, and the struggle between order and chaos. We also learned to read the shadows in this story, to see how these same beautiful symbols could be tools of terrifying propaganda, used to erase dissent and justify brutal power, a sobering reminder that the stories carved in stone are almost always the stories of the victors. This exploration reveals a thread that runs unbroken from those first carved pillars in Turkey to the polished marble halls of modern power. It is the enduring human need to root our leaders, and by extension our societies, in something greater than the mundane. We crave a narrative that connects the exercise of power to a cosmic order, to a timeless story of struggle and triumph. The ancient king walked a path of stars on his temple floor to prove he was part of a divine plan. Today, a leader walks a path of media cycles and public perception, leveraging symbols, rituals, and branded narratives to accomplish the very same goal: to transform a person into an icon, a political platform into a destiny. The medium has changed from stone to digital, but the message, the deep human yearning to believe in something ordained and meaningful, remains remarkably unchanged. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell once offered a key to understanding this entire sprawling history of ours when he said, "Myths are public dreams, dreams are private myths." Look at these temple floors with that in mind. They are the public dreams of entire civilizations, their deepest fears about chaos, their highest hopes for order, their most profound questions about life and power, all projected outward onto a stone canvas. And our private dreams, they are the myths we tell ourselves about who we are and what we can become. This ancient practice of encoding belief is not a relic, it is a mirror. We are all still writing our own codes, weaving our own myths, and searching for our own paths through the labyrinth. These silent stones ask us a final, lingering question. What story are you walking on, and who truly is writing the path beneath your feet? We've covered so much ground together, from the banks of the Nile to the highlands of Peru. I'm incredibly curious to know which part of this deep dive resonated most with you. Was it the sheer engineering mystery of Göbekli Tepe, the dramatic, high-stakes ritual of the Mesoamerican ballgame, or perhaps the darker revelation of how these symbols could be used as tools of control? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden layers of mythology and power, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss our next adventure. There are always more codes to crack, more stories waiting just beneath the surface. Thank you for watching.